"Let go of my hand." The Duke looked at the crowd watching. Too late. The Hartwell ball was, by all accounts, the event of the season. Lady Hartwell had spent 6 months and an obscene portion of her husband's fortune transforming her ballroom into what she called a Venetian dreamscape, which in practice meant enough candles to illuminate a small city, silk draping in impractical quantities, and a string quartet that had been imported from Vienna at tremendous expense. The cream of London society had turned out in their finest, determined to be seen, to see, and to engage in that most sacred of aristocratic rituals, the assessment of everyone else's clothing, partners, and prospects. Cordelia Blackwood noticed none of it. She stood in her usual position near the potted palms that Lady Hartwell had placed strategically to disguise a crack in the plaster, close enough to the refreshment table to justify her presence, but far enough from the dancing to avoid the pitying glances of matrons who remembered when she had been fresh-faced and full of potential. 3 seasons ago, those matrons had called her spirited. 2 seasons ago, they had called her particular. Now they simply shook their heads and murmured about the tragedy of a girl who had talked herself out of every acceptable offer. "You're glowering again," said the young woman beside her. Cordelia did not adjust her expression. "I am not glowering. I am observing. There is a difference." Miss Penelope Whitmore, her closest friend and fellow wallflower, raised a sceptical eyebrow. Penelope was everything Cordelia was not: soft, where Cordelia was sharp; quiet, where Cordelia was cutting; and genuinely content with her position on the margins of society. She had come to terms with her own unmarriageability years ago, having been born with a twisted foot that made dancing impossible and, in the eyes of the marriage mart, rendered her invisible. "You're observing Lord Pemberton with what I can only describe as murderous intent," Penelope said mildly. "Should I be concerned?" Cordelia's jaw tightened. Across the ballroom, Lord Pemberton was laughing at something Lady Catherine Shaw had said, his hand resting on her gloved arm with proprietary familiarity. Lady Catherine was 17, lovely, and possessed of a £40,000 dowry. Lord Pemberton was 43, thrice widowed, and possessed of wandering hands and persistent breath that smelled of onions. "He asked me to dance earlier," Cordelia said flatly. "Ah," Penelope's voice held understanding. "And you said?" "I said that I would rather waltz with a particularly diseased pig than spend 3 minutes in his company, and that if he touched my arm again, I would ensure he never touched anything with that hand for the rest of his natural life." Penelope choked on her lemonade. "Cordelia." "He had already touched my arm twice without invitation. I was being restrained. You threatened to maim a peer of the realm. I threatened to inconvenience him slightly. The distinction matters." Cordelia finally looked away from Lord Pemberton, her expression softening slightly as she met her friend's eyes. I know I shouldn't have. But Penny, if you had seen the way he looked at me, like I should be grateful for his attention. Like 3 seasons on the shelf meant I had no right to refuse anyone, regardless of how repulsive." She stopped herself, pressing her lips together. This was the trap she fell into, again and again. The anger would rise, and the words would spill out, and afterward she would stand alone, wondering why she couldn't simply keep silent, like every other woman in this God-forsaken ballroom. "Your father," Penelope said gently. "How is he?" The change of subject was a kindness, but it landed like a blow nonetheless. Cordelia's hand tightened around her glass of lemonade, the only outward sign of the fear that lived like a constant companion in her chest these days. "Worse. The physician says weeks, perhaps a month or 2 if we are fortunate." She kept her voice steady through long practice. "He cannot travel any more. Tonight was he insisted I come. Said he wanted to imagine me dancing while he rested. I did not have the heart to tell him that no one has asked me to dance in 6 months except Lord Pemberton and his ilk. Penelope's hand found hers and squeezed briefly. I'm sorry. Don't be. It is what it is. Cordelia straightened her spine, a gesture that had become as automatic as breathing. When he passes, I shall live with my brother and his charming wife. Caroline has already informed me that I shall be expected to earn my keep as governess to her children and companion to her mother. I believe her exact words were that I should finally make myself useful, since I failed at the one task any woman with sense can accomplish. She didn't. She did. At Christmas dinner, between the fish course and the roast. Cordelia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. So you see, I have much to look forward to. A lifetime of teaching Caroline's dreadful offspring their letters and listening to Mrs. Blackwood Sr. complain about her digestion. I shall be the very picture of feminine fulfillment. Before Penelope could respond, a ripple went through the crowd near the ballroom entrance. Cordelia watched with detached interest as conversations stuttered and stopped, as fans came up to hide whispered exchanges, as the careful choreography of the evening faltered and reformed around some new point of focus. What on earth? Penelope stood on her toes, trying to see over the crowd. Cordelia didn't bother. Whatever had captured society's attention would become clear soon enough, and she found she lacked the energy for curiosity tonight. Her father was dying. Her future was a narrow corridor of servitude and resentment. Lord Pemberton was still shooting her looks of offended dignity from across the room. The identity of whatever notable had just arrived seemed monumentally unimportant. "It's Ashworth," someone hissed nearby. The name cut through Cordelia's indifference like a knife through silk. The Duke of Ashworth. She had never seen him. He had retreated from society before her first season, emerging only for parliamentary duties and the occasional business matter that required his presence in London. But she had heard the stories. Everyone had heard the stories. His wife's flagrant affair with a cavalry officer. The duel that never happened because the officer fled to the continent. The carriage accident that killed the Duchess while she was attempting to follow her lover, leaving behind a husband who had become the subject of either pity or derision, depending on who was telling the tale. 3 years, Penelope breathed. He hasn't attended a social function in 3 years. Why now? Cordelia found herself looking despite her resolution not to. The crowd had parted not consciously, but with the instinctive awareness prey animals develop around predators, and through the gap she could see him clearly. He was tall. That was her first impression. Tall and broad-shouldered, and dressed in evening clothes that were impeccably tailored, but somehow seemed like a costume, as if he were playing the role of duke rather than inhabiting it. His hair was dark and slightly too long, curling at his collar in a way that suggested either carelessness or contempt for fashion. His face, Cordelia felt something shift in her chest, an uncomfortable recognition. His face was handsome in the way of classical statues. Strong bones, aristocratic features, the kind of face that should have graced romantic poetry. But it was utterly, completely expressionless. He surveyed the ballroom with grey eyes that seemed to catalogue every face, every whisper, every fan raised to hide speculation, and found it all wanting. There was no warmth there, no humanity, just a cold assessment that made Cordelia think of winter coming early, of frost killing flowers before they could bloom. He looks like he's calculating exactly how long he must stay before fleeing becomes socially acceptable, she murmured. Penelope made a sound that was half laugh, half concern. Can you blame him? Half the room is staring at him like he's an exhibit in a menagerie, and the other half is calculating how quickly they can push their daughters into his path. Cordelia watched as Lady Hartwell descended upon the Duke with the determination of a general mounting a campaign. He's a duke, unwed for practical purposes, and possessed of one of the largest fortunes in England. The scandal only makes him more interesting to certain people. You sound very cynical for someone who came here hoping to find a husband. I came here because my father asked me to. Cordelia turned away from the spectacle of the Duke enduring Lady Hartwell's aggressive hospitality. And I gave up hope of finding a husband approximately 18 months ago, somewhere between telling Baron Whitfield that his poetry reminded me of a consumptive cow and informing Sir Harold Pembroke that if he looked down my bodice one more time, I would pour punch on his head and claim it was an accident. Penelope's lips twitched. I remember the punch incident. It wasn't an accident. I know. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the ballroom reorganize itself around the Duke's presence. He had escaped Lady Hartwell, and now stood near the windows, a glass of something amber in his hand, looking like a man waiting for execution. Miss Blackwood. The voice came from behind her, oily and too familiar. Cordelia closed her eyes briefly, gathering her patience, before turning to face Lord Pemberton. He was smiling. It was not a pleasant expression. I thought perhaps you might reconsider your earlier, hasty words. The dancing is about to begin, and I find myself without a partner for the first waltz. How unfortunate for you. Cordelia kept her voice flat. As I said earlier, my lord, I must decline. Come now. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the onions on his breath, the wine, something else underneath that was simply him, and made her skin crawl. A woman in your position can hardly afford to be so particular. Your father's illness is common knowledge. Your prospects are... My prospects are my own concern. Cordelia stepped back, but he followed, crowding her against the potted palm. Lord Pemberton, I have refused you clearly and unambiguously. A gentleman would accept that refusal. A gentleman might also recognize when a lady is simply playing coy. His hand came up to touch her arm again, and Cordelia felt something snap inside her. I am not playing anything. She knocked his hand away, no longer caring who saw. I have refused you 3 times this evening. I will refuse you 300 more if necessary. You are 40 years my senior. You have buried 3 wives under suspicious circumstances that polite society declines to examine too closely, and your personal hygiene leaves much to be desired. If you touch me again, I will scream loudly enough to bring this entire ballroom's attention upon us, and I will explain in vivid detail exactly why. Do I make myself clear? Lord Pemberton's face had gone an alarming shade of purple. You little... The lady said no. Penelope's quiet voice cut through his spluttering. I believe there are other young women in attendance who might welcome your attention, my lord. Perhaps you should seek them out. For a moment, Cordelia thought he might make a scene regardless. She could see the fury building in his small eyes, the wounded pride of a man who had never been refused anything in his life. But something in Penelope's calm gaze, or perhaps the realization that they were not as unobserved as he had assumed, made him reconsider. You will regret this, he said to Cordelia, low enough that only she could hear. Spinsters who forget their place always do. He walked away. Cordelia released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Well, Penelope said, that was bracing. I need air. Cordelia's hands were shaking. She realized. Not from fear, from the aftermath of anger, the familiar crash that followed every time she let her temper slip its leash. I need to be somewhere that isn't here, even for 5 minutes. The terrace is full of couples seeking privacy and chaperones seeking to interrupt them. Cordelia shook her head. I saw a door near the servants' entrance. It looked like it led to a study or a library, somewhere quiet. Cordelia, you can't just wander through Lord Hartwell's private rooms. I can. I am. I'll return before anyone notices I'm gone. She was already moving, slipping through the crowd with the practiced invisibility of someone who had spent 3 seasons learning not to be seen. Cover for me if anyone asks. She didn't wait for Penelope's response. The door she had noticed earlier was half hidden behind another unfortunate potted plant, clearly meant for servants' use rather than guests. Cordelia glanced around to ensure no one was watching, then slipped through. The corridor beyond was narrow and unlit, a service passage that ran behind the public rooms. She followed it by feel, trailing her hand along the wall until she found another door. This one opened into darkness. Cordelia stepped through, closing the door behind her, and let out a breath of pure relief. The noise of the ballroom faded to a distant murmur. The air smelled of books and leather and dust, a library or study, as she had hoped. She leaned against the door, closed her eyes, and allowed herself one moment of complete honesty. She was so tired of smiling when she wanted to scream. Tired of being told her worth lay in her ability to attract a husband and then being punished for failing to attract the right kind. Tired of watching her father fade away while pretending she was fine, she was managing, she would survive whatever came next. She would survive, of course, she always had. But somewhere along the way, survival had stopped feeling like triumph and started feeling like sentence. A small sound interrupted her self-pity. Cordelia's eyes flew open. She was not alone in the darkness. "Hello?" she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Is someone there?" The sound came again, a hiccup, a sniffle. Someone crying, someone small. Cordelia's eyes were adjusting to the darkness now. Moonlight filtered through a gap in the heavy curtains, enough to make out shapes. A desk, chairs, bookshelves, and there, huddled in the corner behind a massive globe, a tiny figure in white. A child. All of Cordelia's defenses crumbled. She had many walls, many weapons, but none of them worked against children. She crossed the room and knelt beside the globe, her evening gown pooling around her on the floor. "Hello there," she said softly. "Are you lost?" The child looked up. A girl, perhaps 6 years old, with dark hair escaping from what had probably been careful ringlets and grey eyes swimming with tears. She was wearing a white dress, far too elaborate for her age, with lace and ribbons that spoke of someone wanting to show her off like a doll. "I'm not supposed to talk to strangers," the girl managed between hiccups. "That's very sensible." Cordelia didn't move closer, letting the child set the pace. "I'm not supposed to be in here at all, if we're being honest. I was hiding from the party. Is that what you're doing?" The girl sniffled, studying Cordelia with the unnerving directness of childhood. "Grandmother said I had to come. She said Papa would want to see me all dressed up. But then she got busy talking to people and she forgot about me and I couldn't find Papa and everyone was so loud." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Cordelia's heart, that supposedly cold and withered organ, clenched painfully. "That sounds dreadful," she said honestly. "Big parties are overwhelming even for adults. For someone your age, they must be terrifying." "I'm not terrified." The girl's chin came up with a dignity that seemed far too old for her years. I don't like crowds, and I don't like strangers looking at me. And I wanted my Papa, but he doesn't—" She stopped, pressing her lips together in a gesture Cordelia recognized all too well. The determination not to say something vulnerable, the fear of revealing too much. This child has walls, Cordelia thought. This child has learned that showing weakness is dangerous. Something broke open inside her. "Do you know what I do when I'm overwhelmed?" she asked, settling more comfortably on the floor. "I find a quiet corner, and I count backwards from 100. By the time I reach 0, I usually feel better. Would you like to try it with me?" The girl considered this proposition with serious gravity. "Does it work?" "Sometimes. And when it doesn't, at least I've had a few minutes of quiet. That's worth something too." A long pause. Then, barely above a whisper, 100. 99, Cordelia responded. 98. They counted together, their voices soft in the darkness. Somewhere around 70, the girl's breathing began to steady. By 50, she had uncurled from her defensive ball. By 20, she had shifted close enough that her small hand found Cordelia's and held on. 0, Cordelia said. How do you feel? Better. The girl looked up at her with something like wonder. How did you know that would work? Because I used to do it when I was your age. My mother... Cordelia stopped, startled by the words that had almost emerged. She never talked about her mother. My mother was often disappointed in me. When I felt like crying, I would count instead. It helped. My mother is dead, the girl said matter-of-factly. She died when I was 3. I don't remember her much. I'm sorry. Grandmother says she was beautiful and perfect, but Papa never talks about her at all. The girl's hand tightened around Cordelia's. What's your name? Cordelia. Miss Cordelia Blackwood. I'm Iris, Lady Iris Crane. She said it like a recitation, something she had been taught to repeat. My papa is the Duke of Ashworth. Cordelia felt the floor shift beneath her. This was the Duke's daughter, the Duke who had just arrived, who was even now being circled by matchmaking mothers and curious gossips, who had retreated from society for 3 years following his wife's scandalous death. This was his child. Sitting in the dark, crying because her grandmother had dragged her to a ball and then abandoned her. Well, Lady Iris, Cordelia said, keeping her voice steady despite the alarm bells ringing in her head, we should probably find your father. He must be worried about you. He didn't even know I was coming. Iris's voice was small. Grandmother brought me as a surprise. She said he would be pleased to see me. But he doesn't know you're here, Cordelia translated silently. And your grandmother left you alone in the dark. Anger flickered in her chest, familiar and hot. What kind of grandmother used a child as a pawn and then discarded her when she became inconvenient? What kind of society considered this normal? Then we shall find him and introduce you properly, she said firmly. But first, I think we need to tidy you up a bit. Your ringlets are coming loose and your face is all tear-stained. May I? Iris nodded, and Cordelia produced a handkerchief from her reticule, plain, practical, nothing like the delicate scraps of lace fashionable ladies carried. She wiped the tears from Iris's cheeks with gentle efficiency, then did her best to repair the damage to her hair. There, she said. Much better. You look every inch the Duke's daughter. Miss Blackwood? Iris's voice was hesitant. Will you stay with me until we find Papa? Every instinct Cordelia possessed screamed a warning. Being found in a dark room with the Duke of Ashworth's daughter could only lead to trouble. There would be questions about why she was there, speculation about her motives, whispers that would follow her for what remained of her social existence. But Iris's hand was still wrapped around hers, small and trusting. Of course, she heard herself say. I won't leave you alone. She had just helped Iris to her feet when the door flew open. Light from the corridor spilled into the room, temporarily blinding. Cordelia threw up a hand to shield her eyes, keeping her other arm around Iris's shoulders. When her vision cleared, she found herself facing the Duke of Ashworth. He was even more imposing up close. Taller than she had realized, broad enough to fill the doorway, his face carved from ice and contempt. Those grey eyes, the same grey as his daughter's, she realized now swept the room and landed on the two of them with an intensity that made her want to step backward. She did not step backward. Cordelia Blackwood did not retreat. Papa! Iris's voice was bright with relief and something more fragile hope, perhaps, or longing. I found a friend. She helped me count backwards from 100, and she fixed my hair, and she promised not to leave me alone. The Duke's expression did not change. His gaze moved from his daughter to Cordelia, cataloguing her plain dress, her unremarkable face, her proprietary arm around his child. "Indeed," he said. His voice was low and cold. "How fortunate." "Your Grace." Cordelia curtsied without releasing Iris, a maneuver that required more coordination than she'd expected. "I apologize for the intrusion into Lord Hartwell's private rooms. I came seeking solitude and found Lady Iris in distress. I thought it best to stay with her until she could be reunited with her family." "How altruistic of you." He stepped into the room, and Cordelia became aware of how the space seemed to shrink around him. "And completely coincidental, I'm sure. That you happened to be in this particular room at this particular moment." The implication landed like a slap. Cordelia felt her temper kindle. "I'm not certain what you're suggesting, Your Grace, but I assure you that comforting a sobbing child does not require ulterior motives." "Doesn't it?" His lips curved in what might have been a smile on a warmer face. "Forgive my cynicism, Miss Blackwood. Miss Blackwood. But I have found that young women who seek out dark rooms at balls generally have something more than solitude on their minds. The fact that you happened upon my daughter, happened upon her crying alone in the dark because she was brought here against your knowledge and then abandoned by her grandmother," Cordelia interrupted, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Yes, how terribly convenient for my supposed scheme. Tell me, Your Grace, do you make a habit of assuming the worst of everyone, or am I simply special?" Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps at being challenged. Cordelia imagined he was not often interrupted. She found she did not care. "Papa." Iris's voice was small and worried. "Miss Blackwood was kind to me. She didn't do anything wrong." The Duke's gaze dropped to his daughter, and Cordelia saw his expression change just slightly, just for a moment, but undeniably. The ice thawed a fraction around the edges. The contempt softened into something that might have been tenderness, quickly hidden. "I see," he said more quietly. "I apologize for my assumption, Miss Blackwood. It appears I am in your debt." Cordelia wanted to argue further. She had several more observations about his suspicious nature and complete lack of faith in human decency. But Iris was still pressed against her side, and this was not the moment for her temper. "No debt is owed," she said stiffly. "I did only what any decent person would do. And yet, in my experience, decent people are in remarkably short supply." He extended his hand toward Iris. "Come, sweetheart. We should find your grandmother and have a conversation about appropriate supervision." Iris hesitated. Her hand tightened around Cordelia's. "Can Miss Blackwood come too?" "I'm sure Miss Blackwood wishes to return to the ball." "Actually," Cordelia said, "I believe I'll stay with Lady Iris until she's safely with her family. She's had quite a distressing evening, and I would hate for anything else to go wrong." The Duke's jaw tightened. "That won't be necessary." "Perhaps not, but it is what I intend to do nonetheless." They stared at each other across the darkened room, neither willing to yield. Cordelia became aware of her heart pounding in her chest, of the absurdity of this standoff, of the very real danger of antagonizing one of the most powerful men in England. She did not look away. "Sebastian!" A new voice from the doorway, female and imperious. Cordelia turned to see an older woman in an elaborate gown of violet silk, her white hair piled high, and her face arranged in an expression of gracious authority that didn't quite hide the steel beneath. "There you are," the woman continued, sweeping into the room. "And Iris, too. I've been looking everywhere. The child wandered off when my back was turned. You know how children are." "Mother." The Duke's voice could have frozen the Thames. "We need to discuss why you thought it appropriate to bring my daughter to London without my knowledge." "Don't be dramatic, Sebastian. I merely thought the poor girl could use an outing. She's been cooped up at Ashworth Park for far too long, with only servants for company. A child needs society. A child needs to feel safe, not to be abandoned in a strange house while her grandmother— "I wasn't abandoned," Iris said quietly. Everyone looked at her. "I mean, I was, but then Miss Blackwood found me. She made everything better." The grandmother's eyes sharpened as she took in Cordelia for the first time. Cordelia recognized the look assessment, calculation, the weighing of potential usefulness against potential threat. "Miss Blackwood, is it?" The woman smiled, showing too many teeth. "How delightful. I am the Dowager Duchess of Ashworth. And you are—" "Miss Cordelia Blackwood, Mr. Edward Blackwood's daughter." "Ah, I believe I knew your mother. Tragic woman, so disappointed in how her daughter turned out." The Dowager's smile widened. 3 seasons, isn't it? And still unwed. One might almost think there was something wrong with you." Cordelia felt the barb sink in, finding its target with practiced precision. She kept her face neutral. "One might. One would be impolite to say so." "Quite." The Dowager turned back to her son, dismissing Cordelia entirely. "In any case, Sebastian, we should return to the ball. People are starting to notice your absence. There are several young ladies I'd like to introduce you to." "No." "Sebastian." "I said no. I came here tonight because you insisted my absence was damaging Iris's prospects for the future. That was manipulative enough. But to bring her here without telling me, to abandon her in a strange house— I did not abandon her. I simply lost track of her for a few minutes while speaking with Lady Hartwell. These things happen." "For an hour," Iris said. Her voice was still quiet, but there was an edge to it now. "I was alone for an hour, grandmother. I counted." The Dowager's smile flickered. "Darling, I'm sure it wasn't that long." "It was. Miss Blackwood found me after I'd already been hiding for a very long time." Iris looked up at Cordelia. She was the only one who came looking. Something shifted in the room. Cordelia felt it a change in the currents, a realignment of forces she didn't fully understand. The Duke was looking at his daughter with an expression she couldn't quite read. The Dowager's mask had slipped slightly, revealing irritation beneath. "Well," the Dowager said finally, recovering her composure, "it seems Miss Blackwood has made quite an impression on our Iris. How fortunate that she was in the right place at the right time." "Wasn't it just?" the Duke said flatly. "One might almost think it was fate." The Dowager's eyes gleamed. "Sebastian, you really should thank Miss Blackwood properly for her kindness to your daughter. Perhaps you could escort her back to the ballroom. I'm sure her family must be wondering where she is." "I'm sure Miss Blackwood can find her own way. I insist." The Dowager's voice was silk over steel. "It's the least you can do. I'll take Iris to get some refreshment while you see to it." Cordelia saw the trap closing, but too late. Before she could protest, the Dowager had swept forward and detached Iris from her side with efficient grace. Iris made a small sound of distress, reaching back toward Cordelia. "I'll see you again before we leave," Cordelia promised, not knowing if it was true. "I promise." Iris nodded, her eyes too old for her face. The Dowager guided her from the room, leaving Cordelia alone with the Duke. The silence stretched between them like a blade. "You should know," the Duke said finally, "that my mother has been trying to see me remarried since approximately 5 minutes after my wife's funeral. She believes it will restore the family's reputation and provide Iris with a proper maternal influence." "How touching." "She also has no scruples whatsoever about manipulating situations to achieve her goals." He met Cordelia's eyes directly. "Whatever she's planning, whatever she thinks she saw here tonight, you should distance yourself from it immediately." "I wasn't aware I needed your permission to help a crying child." "You don't. But you need to understand what you've walked into." He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. My family destroys everything it touches, Miss Blackwood. Proximity to me will bring you nothing but gossip and grief. Take my advice and return to your evening. Forget you ever met my daughter or me. And if I don't take your advice? He looked back at her, and for a moment she saw something flicker in those grey eyes, something almost like regret. Then you're a fool, and you'll learn that lesson the hard way, as everyone in my orbit eventually does. He was gone before she could respond. Cordelia stood alone in the darkened room, her heart pounding, her mind racing. She should do as he suggested. Return to Penelope, collect her belongings, go home to her dying father. Forget the strange child with walls too thick for her age, the cold duke with his warnings and his walls, the predatory grandmother with her calculating smile. She should. She knew she should. Instead, she found herself walking back toward the ballroom, scanning the crowd for a small figure in white. She found them near the refreshment table Iris, standing stiff and silent beside her grandmother, who was holding court with a group of matrons. The Duke stood slightly apart, his back to the wall, his expression even more forbidding than before. And everyone was watching. Cordelia felt the weight of attention as she approached. She saw the whispers start, the fans come up, the speculation begin. An unmarried woman of no particular status, approaching the Duke of Ashworth's party. The gossip would spread through the room like fire through dry grass. She should turn around, walk away, protect what little remained of her reputation. Iris saw her coming, and her face transformed relief and joy, replacing the careful blankness. She pulled away from her grandmother and ran toward Cordelia, arms outstretched. "Miss Blackwood, you came!" Cordelia caught her, kneeling down to the child's level without thinking about the picture they made. "I told you I would see you again. I know, but sometimes people say things and then they don't." Iris stopped, clearly aware she had revealed too much. "I'm glad you came." "As am I." Cordelia straightened, keeping her hand in Iris's. "I wanted to make sure you were all right." "I am now." Iris's small fingers tightened around hers. "Will you stay? Grandmother wants to introduce Papa to more ladies and I don't want to watch. It makes him look so sad, even when his face doesn't show it." Over Iris's head, Cordelia saw the Duke approaching. His face was thunderous. "Miss Blackwood." His voice was low and dangerous. "I thought I made myself clear." "You made yourself exceptionally clear, Your Grace. I chose not to heed your advice." "Clearly." He reached for Iris's hand, but the child pressed closer to Cordelia. "Iris, come away." "Miss Blackwood needs to return to her own party." "I don't want to. I want to stay with Miss Blackwood. She's nice and she doesn't look at me like I'm a problem." Cordelia saw the Duke flinch, tiny, quickly hidden, but unmistakable. "You look at your own daughter and see a problem," she thought. "Or she thinks you do. How long has this been going on?" "Iris." "Oh, this is delightful." The Dowager had arrived, her voice carrying just far enough to ensure she would be overheard. "Sebastian, look how attached Iris has become to Miss Blackwood. I haven't seen her take to anyone like this since ever, really. It's quite remarkable." "Mother, don't." "Don't what?" "Observe that your daughter has finally found someone she feels comfortable with. Really, Sebastian, you should be grateful." The Dowager turned to Cordelia with a smile that showed too many teeth. "Miss Blackwood, I don't know what magic you worked on our Iris, but you have my sincere thanks. The child is usually so shy, so withdrawn. To see her reaching out to someone—" Cordelia saw what was happening, saw the trap being constructed in real time, watched the Dowager weave her web with practiced precision. Every word was designed to draw attention, to create a narrative, to force a conclusion. "Your Grace, I really should—" "Nonsense. You must stay. Iris would be devastated if you left now." The dowager took Cordelia's arm with surprising strength. "Come, let me introduce you to some people. I'm sure they'll be fascinated to meet the woman who captured my granddaughter's heart." "Mother!" The Duke's voice was steel. "Stop this." "I'm merely being hospitable, Sebastian. Miss Blackwood did us a great service tonight. The least we can do is—" "Let go of my arm." Everyone stopped. Cordelia had spoken without thinking, the words emerging flat and cold. The dowager's grip loosened slightly but did not release. "I beg your pardon?" "I said let go. I am not a piece in whatever game you're playing, Your Grace. I helped your granddaughter because she was crying and alone, not because I wished to ingratiate myself with your family." Cordelia pulled her arm free. "And I have had quite enough of being manipulated for one evening." The dowager's expression flickered between outrage and something almost like respect. "You have a sharp tongue, Miss Blackwood. I have been told so frequently, usually by people who wished I would be easier to manage." Cordelia took a step back, intending to finally make her escape, and Iris grabbed her hand. "Don't go," the child whispered. "Please. Everyone always goes." Cordelia froze. Around them, the ballroom had gone quiet. She was aware of eyes on her from every direction, of the whispers starting up again, of the Duke standing rigid with fury, and something else she couldn't name. She should pull away. She should leave. She should protect herself, as she always had, as she had learned to do in a world that punished women for showing weakness. But Iris's hand was trembling in hers. "I'm not going anywhere," she said softly. "I promise." "How touching." The dowager's voice dripped with false warmth. "Sebastian, look at this. Miss Blackwood seems to have a true gift with children." One might almost think, enough. The Duke stepped forward. His face was pale, his jaw clenched tight enough to shatter. "This ends now." "It's already ended, my dear." The dowager's smile was triumphant. "Or hadn't you noticed? Half the ballroom has been watching this little scene. A young woman, clearly intimate with your daughter, holding hands with you in a private room. We were not holding hands. But you were alone together, in the dark, and now here she is, unable to tear herself away from your family. What do you think people will say tomorrow?" The Duke looked at Cordelia. His expression was unreadable, but she saw the moment he understood, the moment he realized what his mother had done, what she had orchestrated, what trap they had both walked into with their eyes closed. "Miss Blackwood," he said quietly, "I need to speak with you, privately. I don't think— Please." The word seemed to cost him something. Cordelia nodded, not knowing what else to do. He led her to the edge of the ballroom, to a relatively quiet corner where they could speak without being overheard, though not without being observed. She was achingly aware of the eyes following them, of the speculation building with every second. "My mother has manipulated us both," he said without preamble. "She orchestrated this entire evening, bringing Iris, abandoning her where she would be found, steering you toward us. I should have seen it coming. And now? And now half of London society has watched you emerge from a dark room with my daughter, hold hands with a child who notoriously holds hands with no one, and stand at my side as if you belonged there." His voice was bitter. "By morning, the rumors will be inescapable. Your reputation will be in tatters." Cordelia laughed, a short, sharp sound with no humor in it. "My reputation has been in tatters for some time, Your Grace. I am unmarriageable, sharp-tongued, and utterly lacking in feminine submission. I doubt this evening will make things appreciably worse." "You underestimate the situation." He met her eyes, and she saw genuine concern there beneath the ice. "Being associated with me carries a particular taint. My wife's scandal, her death, the whispers that have followed me for 3 years, they will attach themselves to you now. You will be subject to scrutiny, speculation, and judgment of a kind you have not yet experienced. Are you trying to frighten me? I am trying to give you an honest assessment. Cordelia looked at him, this cold, angry, wounded man who had tried to warn her away, who had called her a fool for not listening, who was now standing in a crowded ballroom trying to prepare her for the storm that was coming. "Thank you," she said, "for your honesty. You should hate me for this. Perhaps, but I find I don't." She smiled slightly. "Besides, I walked into this with my eyes open. Your mother may have set the trap, but I chose to step into it when I refused to leave Iris." "Why?" The question seemed to emerge against his will. "You don't know us. You owe us nothing. Why did you stay?" Cordelia thought of Iris, crying alone in the dark, of the walls that child had built, so young and already so necessary, of the way she had looked at Cordelia like she was something precious and unexpected, something that might vanish at any moment. "Because someone should have," she said quietly. "Because your daughter needed kindness, and I happened to be in a position to offer it. Because—" She stopped, unsure how to explain the rest. "Because I know what it feels like to be alone. Because I recognize something in her that I recognize in myself. Because for all my sharp words and careful walls, I am not actually capable of walking past a crying child, no matter what it costs me." "Miss Blackwood." His voice had changed softer now, less angry. When she looked up, his expression had shifted too. The ice had cracked slightly, revealing something more human beneath. "I find myself in an impossible position," he said slowly. "My mother has engineered a scandal that will damage you irreparably unless it is addressed. The only way to address it, to restore your reputation and protect you from the worst of the gossip, would be— No." He blinked. "I haven't finished. You were going to propose marriage, as a matter of honor, to repair the damage done by this evening's events." Cordelia shook her head firmly. "I won't accept a proposal made under duress, Your Grace. Not from you, not from anyone. I have spent 3 seasons refusing men who thought I should be grateful for their attention. I will not marry a man who sees me as an obligation to be fulfilled." "That is not— Isn't it?" She met his eyes without flinching. "You don't know me. I don't know you. We have exchanged perhaps 50 words, most of them in irritation. You think I am a fortune hunter or a fool or both. I think you are cold, suspicious, and determined to see the worst in everyone. This is not a foundation for marriage." The Duke stared at her. "You're serious?" "Completely. You would rather face social ruin than marry me." "I would rather face social ruin than marry anyone for the wrong reasons." Cordelia lifted her chin. "I am not naive, Your Grace. I know what this evening will cost me, but I have been told my entire life that my value lies in my marriageability, and I refuse to prove that assessment correct by selling myself to the first man who offers, regardless of his motives." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps, or a grudging respect. "You are unlike anyone I have ever met." "I have been told that before, usually as an insult. I did not mean it as one." Before either of them could speak again, a commotion erupted behind them. Cordelia turned to see Iris pulling away from her grandmother, her small face set in determination. "Papa!" She ran toward them, heedless of propriety. "Papa, I heard what grandmother said. I heard what she did. Please don't be angry with Miss Blackwood. It wasn't her fault. It was my fault for grabbing her hand and not letting go. If you have to be angry at someone, be angry at me." The Duke knelt down, bringing himself to his daughter's level. "I'm not angry at Miss Blackwood," he said quietly. "I'm not angry at you." "Then why do you look so sad?" The question hung in the air. Cordelia watched the Duke's face, watched the walls tremble, watched him struggle to find words for emotions he had clearly buried long ago. "Because I'm tired," he said finally. "And because I have made a mess of things, as I always do." "You haven't." Iris took his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his much larger ones. "You came looking for me. You found me. That's not a mess. Miss Blackwood found you. But you came." Iris looked up at Cordelia, then back at her father. "Papa, I like Miss Blackwood. She's kind and she doesn't pretend. Can she come visit us, please?" The Duke rose to his feet, still holding his daughter's hand. His eyes met Cordelia's, and in that moment something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of one. "That would depend on Miss Blackwood," he said slowly, "and on whether she wishes to have anything further to do with our troubled family." Cordelia thought of her father, dying at home, of her brother's wife, already measuring the rooms that would become Cordelia's prison, of the life that awaited her grey and narrow and stretching out for decades. She thought of Iris, crying alone in the dark. She thought of the Duke, standing rigid against the world, too wounded to let anyone close. She should refuse. Every practical instinct screamed that she should walk away, save what remained of her reputation, return to her predetermined path. Instead, she said, "I would like that very much." The Dowager appeared beside them, her face arranged in satisfaction. "How lovely. Sebastian, since Miss Blackwood has so generously agreed to befriend Iris, perhaps you might see her home. It's getting late, and her family must be worried." "I can see myself home." "Nonsense. Sebastian will escort you. It's the least he can do after this evening's excitements." The Dowager's smile sharpened. "Besides, people are starting to notice how long you've been talking. If he escorts you out, it will look deliberate rather than desperate. Trust me, dear, this is how these things are managed." Cordelia wanted to argue, but she saw the logic. Looking like the Duke was paying her particular attention was better than looking like she had been caught in a compromising situation and abandoned. The narrative mattered. She understood that well enough. "Fine," she said, "but I should let my friend know I'm leaving." She found Penelope still by the potted palms, her face a mask of carefully contained panic. "Cordelia Blackwood, where in heaven's name have you been? There are rumors flying everywhere, something about you and the Duke and his daughter. People are saying you were found together in a private room. Most of it is probably true." Cordelia took her friend's hands. "I'll explain everything tomorrow, but right now I need to leave, and the Duke is escorting me home." Penelope's eyes went wide. "The Duke is escorting you home? It's not what you think. I don't even know what I think anymore." Penelope squeezed her hands. "Are you all right?" "I honestly don't know." Cordelia laughed, slightly unhinged. "But I will be. I always am." She returned to find the Duke waiting by the entrance, Iris still clinging to his hand. His carriage was being summoned. The Dowager had vanished, presumably to continue spinning whatever narrative served her purposes. "Miss Blackwood." The Duke offered his arm with formal courtesy. "Shall we?" Cordelia took his arm. It was solid beneath her fingers, warm even through the layers of his coat. She was aware of every eye in the ballroom tracking their progress toward the door. "I meant what I said," she told him quietly. "I won't marry you out of obligation." "I understood you the first time. Then you should know that whatever happens from this point forward, whatever scandal emerges from tonight, I made my choice with full knowledge of the consequences. I don't expect you to rescue me." He looked down at her, something almost like a smile flickering at the corner of his mouth. "You are a very strange woman, Miss Blackwood." "I have been told that before. I'm beginning to think it was meant as a compliment." The carriage arrived. The Duke handed Iris in first, then turned to assist Cordelia. As his hand closed around hers, warm, strong, unexpectedly gentle, she felt something shift in her chest. A door opening, a wall crumbling. Too late, she thought. The words he had spoken earlier, accepting the trap they had both fallen into. Too late for retreat. Too late for safety. Too late to pretend this evening had not changed everything. She stepped into the carriage, and the Duke followed, and behind them the ballroom buzzed with speculation about what it all meant. Cordelia did not know what it meant. She only knew that for the first time in 3 seasons she felt something other than resigned despair about her future. She felt, against all wisdom, something dangerously close to hope. The carriage ride to Cordelia's home passed in near silence. Iris had fallen asleep within minutes, her head resting against her father's arm, her small body finally surrendering to the exhaustion of an overwhelming evening. The Duke sat rigid and still, as if afraid any movement might wake her. Cordelia watched them in the flickering lamplight, this cold, remote man who held his daughter with such careful tenderness, as if she were made of spun glass and might shatter at the slightest pressure. There was something painful about the picture they made, something that spoke of love unexpressed and distance maintained, and years of loneliness on both sides. "She doesn't sleep well," the Duke said suddenly, his voice low enough not to disturb Iris. "Nightmares. She's had them since she was 4. Since her mother died." He nodded once curtly. "The physicians say she'll grow out of them. The nursemaids say she's simply high-strung. My mother says she's dramatic and needs firmer handling. And what do you say?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I say that she lost her mother before she could understand what death meant, and that she has been surrounded by people who view her as a problem to be managed rather than a child to be loved. I say that I have failed her in every way that matters, and her nightmares are simply evidence of that failure." Cordelia felt her heart clench. "You haven't failed her. You don't know that. I know that she ran to you when she was frightened. I know that she defended you to your mother. I know that when I found her crying in the dark, the person she wanted most was her papa." Cordelia met his eyes steadily. "Children don't reach for people who have failed them, Your Grace. They reach for people they trust, even when that trust has been tested." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the ice, quickly covered. "You speak with authority on the subject." "I speak from experience." She looked out the window at the darkened streets passing by. "My mother found me disappointing from birth. I was not pretty enough, not graceful enough, not biddable enough. She made her feelings very clear through word and action. I stopped reaching for her when I was 6 years old. I have not reached for her since. I'm sorry. Don't be. It taught me valuable lessons about the difference between the people who love us and the people who simply own us." She turned back to face him. "Your daughter still reaches for you. That means something." The carriage slowed and stopped outside her family's modest townhouse. Cordelia gathered her things, preparing to step out into whatever remained of her reputation. "Miss Blackwood." The Duke's voice stopped her with her hand on the door. "What I said earlier about my family destroying everything it touches, I meant it as a warning, not a prophecy. But I find myself hoping, against all evidence, that you might prove the exception. I have been proving people wrong my entire life, Your Grace. I see no reason to stop now." She stepped out of the carriage before he could respond, closing the door firmly behind her. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of his face, surprised, perhaps, or thoughtful, or some combination she couldn't read. The carriage pulled away into the darkness. Cordelia stood on her doorstep for a long moment, feeling the cool night air against her heated cheeks. Whatever had happened tonight, whatever consequences were coming, she could not bring herself to regret it. For the first time in years, she had acted on instinct rather than calculation, kindness rather than self-protection. For the first time in years, She had felt like herself. She went inside to sit with her dying father, and she did not sleep at all. 3 days later, the invitation arrived. Cordelia stared at it as if it might bite her. Heavy cream paper, elegant script, the Ashworth crest embossed in gold. She was cordially invited to Ashworth Park for a fortnight's visit, to become better acquainted with the family prior to a formal announcement. What announcement? She demanded of the empty parlour. Her father, dozing in his chair by the fire, stirred slightly but did not wake. He had been sleeping more and more lately, eating less and less. The physician visited daily now, speaking in quiet tones about comfort and dignity and preparing for the end. Cordelia listened to the words and felt them bounce off her like rain off stone. She could not afford to feel this grief yet. There was too much else to manage. The gossip from Lady Hartwell's ball had spread through London like wildfire, exactly as the Duke had predicted. Miss Cordelia Blackwood, found alone with the Duke of Ashworth in a private room. Miss Cordelia Blackwood, emerging dishevelled and flustered. Miss Cordelia Blackwood, holding hands with the Duke's notoriously shy daughter, as if they had known each other for years. The stories grew more elaborate with each retelling. By the time they reached Cordelia's ears, she had apparently been discovered in the Duke's passionate embrace, had thrown herself at him with mercenary determination, had somehow bewitched his innocent child as part of an elaborate scheme to trap a wealthy husband. Her brother's wife, Caroline, had visited yesterday to deliver these reports with obvious satisfaction. "Well, Cordelia, you've certainly made a spectacle of yourself, though I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. You never could manage to behave appropriately." Caroline had examined her fingernails with studied casualness. "Robert is quite angry, of course. He says you've embarrassed the family name beyond repair. He's considering whether it might be best for you to simply stay away from London entirely once father passes. A quiet retirement to the country, perhaps. Somewhere no one knows you. How thoughtful of him to concern himself with my future. He's the head of the family. It's his duty." Caroline had smiled thinly. "Of course, if the Duke actually marries you, which I sincerely doubt, things would be different. But we both know that's not going to happen, don't we? Dukes don't marry plain spinsters with sharp tongues, not unless they have very large fortunes, which you do not." Cordelia had said nothing. There was nothing to say. Caroline was right about one thing. Dukes did not marry women like her. The invitation to Ashworth Park was likely the dowager's doing, another move in whatever game she was playing. But Iris had asked if she would visit, and Cordelia, fool that she was, had promised. She penned her acceptance that afternoon and sent it before she could change her mind. Ashworth Park was not at all what Cordelia expected. She had imagined something grand and imposing, a monument to aristocratic power and centuries of accumulated wealth. Instead, the carriage turned down a tree-lined drive to reveal a house that was merely beautiful warm golden stone, generous windows, gardens that had clearly been designed for pleasure rather than intimidation. It looked like a home, not a palace. And yet, as the carriage drew closer, Cordelia noticed the small signs of neglect. Hedges slightly overgrown, windows that needed washing, a fountain in the front courtyard that stood dry and silent, its basin filling with fallen leaves. The house was beautiful, yes, but it was also tired, sad, waiting for something or someone to bring it back to life. The butler who greeted her was ancient and formal, his face betraying nothing as he welcomed her to Ashworth Park and directed footmen to carry her modest trunk. The housekeeper who showed her to her room was equally expressionless, offering efficient service without warmth. "The Duke is in his study and asks not to be disturbed until dinner," the housekeeper informed her. "Lady Iris is in the nursery. The Dowager Duchess is resting in her rooms. Tea will be served in the blue parlour at 4 o'clock. "Thank you." Cordelia was left alone in a bedroom that was elegant but impersonal, decorated in shades of blue and cream, that suggested a guest room rarely used. She unpacked her belongings, her practical gowns, her few pieces of jewelry, the books she had brought for company, and tried not to feel like an intruder. At precisely 4 o'clock, she made her way to the blue parlour. The dowager was already there, arranged on a settee with the practiced grace of a woman who knew exactly how to display herself to best advantage. She looked up as Cordelia entered, her smile sharpening. "Miss Blackwood, how delightful that you could join us." "Your Grace." Cordelia curtsied precisely, neither too deep nor too shallow. "Thank you for the invitation." "Thank my son. He was most insistent that you be invited." The dowager's eyes gleamed with speculation. "Though I confess I had my doubts. A fortnight is a long time to spend with near strangers. I do hope you won't find us too tiresome." "I'm sure I won't." "Indeed. Though I should warn you, Ashworth Park can be rather dreary. Sebastian has let things slide since his wife's death. The staff is reduced, the entertaining non-existent, the atmosphere rather like a tomb." The dowager gestured for Cordelia to sit. "I have tried to convince him to open the house again, to resume his proper place in society, but he is stubborn. Perhaps he simply prefers privacy." "Privacy." The dowager laughed, a sound without warmth. "Is that what we're calling it? I call it hiding. My son has been hiding for 3 years, Miss Blackwood, hiding from society, from responsibility, from life itself. And poor Iris has been hiding with him, growing up in this mausoleum with no companions, no stimulation, no future to look forward to." Cordelia felt her temper kindle, but kept her voice steady. "From what I observed, Lady Iris seems quite attached to her father." "Attached, yes. But is attachment healthy when it stems from having no other options?" The dowager leaned forward, her expression earnest. "I am not a villain, Miss Blackwood, despite what Sebastian may have told you. I am a grandmother who wants what is best for her granddaughter. Iris needs society. She needs friends her own age. She needs a mother who can guide her into womanhood. And Sebastian needs a wife who can help him remember that life is meant to be lived, not merely endured. And you think I can be that wife?" "I think you might be." The dowager's gaze was assessing. "You have spirit. You have intelligence. You handled the situation at the ball with more grace than I expected. No tears, no hysteria, no desperate clinging. Sebastian respects strength. He despises weakness. If you can maintain that composure, if you can reach him without pushing too hard—" "I have not agreed to marry your son, Your Grace." "No, but you came, didn't you?" The dowager smiled. "That tells me everything I need to know about your intentions." Before Cordelia could respond, the door opened and Iris burst through, her face alight with joy. "Miss Blackwood, you came. Papa said you would, but I wasn't sure because sometimes people say things and then they don't do them. But you did. You actually came." Cordelia rose to catch the child, who threw herself into her arms with abandon. "Of course I came. I told you I would." I know. Iris pulled back, beaming up at her. "I have so much to show you. My pony and my garden and my collection of pressed flowers and the tower room where you can see for miles and miles and—" "Iris." The dowager's voice was sharp. "Compose yourself. Young ladies do not throw themselves at guests like wild creatures." Iris's face fell. She stepped back from Cordelia, her expression shuddering. "I apologize, grandmother." "See that you remember your manners in future." The dowager turned back to her tea. "Miss Blackwood will be here for 2 weeks. There is no need to overwhelm her in the first 5 minutes." Cordelia saw the light fade from Iris's eyes and felt something hot and fierce rise in her chest. She reached out and took the child's hand. "Actually, I would love to see the tower room. Would you show me, Lady Iris? I've been sitting in a carriage all day and could use a walk." Iris's face transformed. Really? You want to? Right now? Right now? Cordelia looked at the dowager with perfect composure. If you'll excuse us, Your Grace. I find myself more in the mood for exploration than tea. She led Iris from the room before the dowager could object, feeling the old woman's eyes boring into her back like daggers. The tower room was worth the climb. 4 flights of narrow stone stairs led to a circular chamber with windows on every side, offering views that stretched to the horizon. The late afternoon sun painted everything gold: the distant village, the rolling hills, the patchwork of fields and forests that made up the Ashworth estate. "Papa used to bring me here when I was little," Iris said, pressing her nose to the glass. "He would point out all the places and tell me their names. That's Millbrook Village, where the tenants live. That's Thornwood Forest, where the deer are. That's the river where we go fishing in summer. It's beautiful. It's my favorite place." Iris turned to look at her. "I come here when I need to think, or when I'm sad, or when grandmother is being—" She stopped, clearly editing herself. "Difficult?" Cordelia suggested. Iris nodded, relief evident. "She thinks I don't know what she's doing. With Papa, I mean. She keeps trying to find him a wife. She invites ladies to stay, or she arranges for him to meet them in London, or she talks about how I need a mother and how Papa needs to think of the future." She twisted her hands together. "But I don't want another mother. My mother is dead. I just want Papa to be happy again." Cordelia knelt down to meet Iris's eyes. "Has your grandmother invited many ladies to stay here?" 3. No, 4. They were all beautiful and elegant, and they smiled at Papa with too many teeth." Iris wrinkled her nose. "He was polite to them, but he never smiled back, and they looked at me like I was a problem to be solved. Like once they married Papa, they would send me away to school and never think about me again." "Is that what you're afraid of? Being sent away?" Iris nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Papa says he would never. But grandmother says a girl my age should be at school, learning proper accomplishments. She says I'm too wild, too strange, too much like—" She stopped abruptly. "Too much like who?" Cordelia asked gently. "Like my mother." The words were barely a whisper. "Grandmother says I have my mother's temperament. She says it like it's a bad thing. But I don't remember my mother, so I don't know if it's bad or not. And Papa never talks about her, so I can't ask." Cordelia's heart ached. This child, caught between a father who couldn't speak about his wounds and a grandmother who used them as weapons. This child, growing up in a beautiful house that felt like a tomb, surrounded by people who claimed to love her but couldn't see past their own pain. "Can I tell you something?" Cordelia said. "Something important?" Iris nodded. "I don't know what your mother was like, but I know that you are kind and brave and loyal. I know that you care about your father's happiness more than your own comfort. I know that you were frightened and alone at that ball, but you didn't fall apart. You found a safe place, and you waited until help came." Cordelia squeezed her hands. "Those are not bad qualities, Iris. Those are the qualities of someone who will grow up to be remarkable." A tear spilled down Iris's cheek. "You really think so?" "I know so." Iris threw her arms around Cordelia's neck, and Cordelia held her tight, feeling the small body tremble with the release of emotions too long suppressed. "I'm glad you came," Iris whispered. "I'm so glad you came." "So am I," Cordelia said, and meant it with her whole heart. Dinner that evening was a formal affair, served in a dining room designed for 30 guests, but occupied by only 4. The Duke sat at the head of the table, the Dowager at the foot, with Cordelia and Iris across from each other in the middle. The arrangement made conversation nearly impossible, too far apart for intimacy, too spread out for anything but polite nothingness. The Duke spoke perhaps 10 words during the entire meal, and most of those were to the servants. He ate mechanically, his eyes focused somewhere in the middle distance, his face betraying nothing. Cordelia watched him when she thought he wasn't looking, and wondered what was happening behind that frozen mask. The Dowager filled the silence with a constant stream of commentary observations about society, opinions about politics, pointed remarks about the house's condition and the necessity of making changes. Sebastian absorbed it all without response, neither agreeing nor disagreeing, simply existing in his own private void. Iris picked at her food and watched Cordelia with worried eyes. After dinner, the Dowager announced she was retiring early and suggested Cordelia do the same. "You've had a long journey, Miss Blackwood. I'm sure you're exhausted." "Actually, I thought I might explore the library." Cordelia had noticed it during her earlier wandering with Iris, a magnificent room filled with books from floor to ceiling. "I'm not tired enough to sleep yet, and I brought no novel for the evening. The library is Sebastian's private domain. He doesn't like people disturbing his space." "I don't mind." The Duke's voice cut through the conversation, startling everyone. He had been so silent all evening that his participation felt almost shocking. "Miss Blackwood is welcome to use the library whenever she wishes," he continued. "In fact, I was planning to retire there myself. I can show her where things are." The Dowager's eyes narrowed, but she smiled graciously. "How thoughtful of you, Sebastian. Iris, come along. It's time for bed." Iris looked at Cordelia desperately, clearly hoping to be allowed to stay. "Go with your grandmother," Cordelia said gently. "I'll come say good night later if that's allowed." "You'll come?" Iris's face lit up. "You promise?" "I promise." The child went, looking back over her shoulder until she disappeared around the corner. Cordelia watched her go, feeling the weight of that small trust like a physical thing. "You shouldn't make promises to her." She turned to find the Duke watching her, his expression unreadable. "I beg your pardon?" "Iris, you shouldn't make promises to her." He moved toward the library door, gesturing for her to follow. "She takes them too seriously, and people have a tendency to break their promises, in my experience." "Then your experience has been with the wrong sort of people." The library was everything Cordelia had hoped for, 2 stories tall, lined with leather-bound volumes, furnished with comfortable chairs and warm lamplight. A fire crackled in the enormous hearth, casting dancing shadows across the ceiling. It felt like the only truly lived-in room she had encountered in this beautiful, empty house. The Duke walked to a side table and poured 2 glasses of brandy, without asking if she wanted one. He handed her a glass, then settled into a chair by the fire, gesturing for her to take the one across from him. "My mother has plans for you," he said without preamble. "I assume you've realized that by now. She made her intentions quite clear during tea." Cordelia sipped the brandy, smooth, expensive, warming. "She believes I might make you an acceptable wife. Do you agree with her assessment? I believe the question of what makes an acceptable wife is far more complicated than your mother acknowledges." Cordelia met his eyes steadily. "She sees a transaction. You need a wife, I need a husband, therefore we should marry. She doesn't seem interested in whether we would suit, whether we could make each other happy, whether we want the same things from life." "And what do you want from life, Miss Blackwood?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that, and she couldn't remember how long. People asked about her marriage prospects, her family situation, her plans for the future. No one asked what she actually wanted. "I want to matter," she said slowly, discovering the truth as she spoke it. "I want to do something meaningful with my time on this earth. I want to love and be loved without having to pretend to be something I'm not." She laughed, self-deprecating. Grand ambitions for a woman in my position, I know. Not grand, honest. He swirled his brandy, watching the amber liquid catch the firelight. I have not encountered much honesty in recent years. It's refreshing. What about you? What do you want? He was silent for a long moment. I want my daughter to be happy. I want the whispers to stop. I want to sleep through the night without dreaming of... He stopped, jaw tightening. It doesn't matter what I want. The things I want are impossible. Nothing is impossible. Spoken like someone who hasn't lost everything. His voice was bitter, but not cruel. I had everything once, Miss Blackwood. I had a wife I adored, a future I believed in, a place in the world that made sense. And I watched it all turn to ash because I was fool enough to trust, to love, to believe that someone could love me in return. Your wife. My wife. He drained his brandy in one long swallow. She was beautiful, charming. Everyone loved her. I loved her most of all desperately, completely, blindly. I gave her everything she asked for and more besides, and in return she made me the laughingstock of London society. The affair. Affairs. Plural. I was the last to know, of course. The devoted husband always is. His laugh was hollow. By the time I discovered the truth, half the ton had been watching and snickering for over a year. My wife had been bedding a cavalry officer for 6 months. Before him, there were others. I was a convenience to her, a title, a fortune, a name to hide behind while she did as she pleased. Cordelia said nothing. There was nothing to say. When I confronted her, she laughed at me, told me I was boring, pathetic, that I had never satisfied her and never could, told me the only reason she had married me was for the title, and now that she had it, she saw no reason to pretend any more. He stared into the empty fire grate. She was planning to leave me for her officer. They were going to run away to the continent together, live off her jewelry and my money until the scandal died down. But she died. Her carriage overturned on the way to meet him. The driver was killed instantly. She lingered for 3 days. His voice had gone flat, mechanical. I sat by her bedside the entire time. She never woke up. She never spoke to me again. The last words she ever said to me were that I was pathetic, and she had never loved me at all. Cordelia felt tears prick her eyes. Not for the dead wife, for the man sitting across from her, hollowed out by grief and betrayal, and 3 years of wondering if any of it had been real. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Don't be." She was right in a way. I was pathetic and pathetic. I built my entire world around someone who saw me as nothing but a means to an end. I have no one to blame but myself. He finally looked at her, and she saw the devastation behind his eyes. That's why I tried to warn you away, Miss Blackwood. I am not capable of being what you need, what anyone needs. The man who could love, who could trust, who could believe in the goodness of others. That man died with his wife. What's left is this. He gestured at himself with something like contempt. This empty shell, going through the motions, being a duke because that's what's expected, failing my daughter because I can't remember how to feel anything except exhaustion and anger and grief. Cordelia set down her brandy and stood. She crossed the space between them and knelt beside his chair, looking up into his face. "You are not an empty shell," she said firmly. "An empty shell doesn't worry about his daughter's nightmares. An empty shell doesn't check on her every night after she's asleep. An empty shell doesn't redesign an entire wing of the house because his daughter mentioned she doesn't like dark hallways." He stared at her. "How do you know about that?" "Iris told me. She notices, you know. Every small thing you do for her, everywhere you try to show you care, she sees it. She knows you love her, even when you can't find the words." "I don't." "You do. You love her so much it terrifies you. Because love requires vulnerability, and vulnerability led to devastation last time, and you would rather die than let yourself be hurt like that again. Cordelia took his hand, feeling him flinch at the contact. I understand, Your Grace. I have been protecting myself the same way for years, building walls, sharpening my tongue, driving away anyone who might get close enough to wound me. It's exhausting, and it's lonely, and in the end, it doesn't protect us from anything. It just ensures we suffer alone instead of together. His hand turned in hers, not quite holding, but not pulling away either. You speak as if you know. I do know. She smiled sadly. My mother's disappointment, my father's illness, 3 seasons of being told I was too much of everything, too sharp, too proud, too unwilling to perform the role society assigned me. I learned to protect myself by never letting anyone close enough to reject me. I told myself I didn't want love, didn't need it, was better off alone. And now? Now I am kneeling on the floor of a duke's library, holding his hand and telling him that he is not irreparably broken. She laughed softly. I seem to have abandoned my walls somewhere along the way. It's terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The Duke looked down at their joined hands for a long moment. When he looked back up, something had shifted in his expression. The ice was still there, but it had cracked, let in a sliver of light, a hint of warmth. You are not what I expected, Miss Blackwood. What did you expect? I don't know. Another fortune hunter, another schemer, another person who wanted something from me and would lie to get it. His thumb moved across her knuckles, almost involuntarily. Instead, I find someone who sits with crying children and speaks uncomfortable truths and refuses to be intimidated by my reputation or my temper. I have been called difficult, she acknowledged. I think you are remarkable. The words hung between them, weighted with possibility. Cordelia felt her heart hammering in her chest, felt the warmth of his hand in hers, felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. I should go, she said softly. I promised Iris I would say good night. Of course. He released her hand, and she felt the loss of contact like a physical thing. Miss Blackwood. She paused at the door. Thank you, he said, for what you said. I'm not sure I believe it yet, but thank you for saying it. It's only the truth, Your Grace. Sebastian. She blinked. I beg your pardon? My name? Sebastian. He smiled. And it transformed his face, not enough to erase the grief, but enough to hint at the man he might have been before the world broke him. If we are going to be spending a fortnight under the same roof, and if you are going to be kneeling on my library floor holding my hand, we might as well dispense with some of the formality. Sebastian, then. The name felt strange on her tongue, intimate. You may call me Cordelia. Cordelia. He said it like he was tasting it, testing its shape. Go say good night to my daughter. She will worry if you don't come. She went. The days that followed settled into an unexpected rhythm. Mornings, Cordelia spent with Iris. They walked in the gardens, rode ponies along the estate paths, explored the dusty corners of the house that hadn't been opened in years. Iris blossomed under the attention, her natural curiosity and enthusiasm emerging from behind the walls she had built. She was clever, this child, clever and imaginative, and desperate for someone to see her as she truly was. Cordelia taught her to press flowers properly, a skill she had learned from a governess years ago. They collected specimens from the wild gardens, arranged them between sheets of parchment, and weighted them with heavy books to dry. Iris took to the project with passionate dedication, spending hours cataloguing her finds and planning where each flower would go in the album she was creating. This one is for Papa, she said one morning, holding up a pressed rose. It's the same color as the roses Mamma used to grow. Mrs. Henderson told me about them. They were famous. Everyone talked about how beautiful they were. But after Mamma died, Papa had them all removed. He said he couldn't bear to look at them. That must have been very painful for him. I think so. Iris carefully positioned the rose on a page. I found this one growing wild by the wall, where some of the old garden must have spread. I thought maybe, if I gave it to him, he might not be so sad anymore. Cordelia felt tears threaten and blinked them back. I think that's a beautiful idea. Afternoons, she found herself increasingly in Sebastian's company. It started accidentally a meeting in the library, a shared cup of tea, a conversation that extended beyond politeness into something more meaningful. But as the days passed, the meetings became intentional. He would appear in the garden where she was walking with Iris, fall into step beside her, ask about their discoveries. He would join them for luncheon, his silence gradually giving way to questions, observations, even occasional dry humor. He was intelligent, she discovered, deeply read, thoughtfully opinionated, capable of debate and discussion in a way that challenged her mind rather than dismissing it. They argued about politics and philosophy and literature, their conversations growing more animated as they both forgot to maintain their defenses. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to change. The servants noticed it first, whispered conversations in the halls about the Duke smiling, the Duke laughing, the Duke actually engaging with life again. Then the housekeeper approached Cordelia after the first week, her manner slightly thawed. "The household wanted me to thank you, Miss Blackwood. We haven't seen His Grace like this since, well, it's been a long time. I haven't done anything. You've done more than you know." The housekeeper paused. "Lady Iris, too. She's come alive this past week, chattering, laughing, acting like a child instead of a small ghost. Whatever magic you're working, miss, we're grateful for it." But the Dowager was less pleased. "You're making progress," she said, during one of their rare private conversations, her tone sharp. "Sebastian seems quite taken with you. But you must be more strategic, Miss Blackwood. A few walks in the garden and philosophical discussions in the library won't secure a proposal." "I'm not trying to secure a proposal." "Then what are you trying to do?" The Dowager's eyes narrowed. "Do you think this is a game? Sebastian's attention is valuable currency, valuable and temporary. Another few weeks and he'll remember why he locked himself away in the first place. If you don't move quickly, you'll lose your chance. I am not interested in manipulating your son into marriage. Then you're a fool. Do you know how many women would kill to be in your position? A duke, a fortune, a title, and you sit there moralizing about manipulation." The Dowager leaned forward. "Let me be clear, Miss Blackwood. I invited you here because I thought you might be useful. But if you're not willing to do what needs to be done, I will find someone who is." Cordelia stood, her composure icy. "Then find them. I will not pretend to be something I'm not, to trap a man into marriage. If the Duke decides he wants to marry me, it will be because he chooses to, not because I deceived him into it. You're making a mistake. Perhaps. But it will be my mistake to make." She walked out, shaking with anger, and nearly collided with Sebastian in the hallway. "Cordelia!" His hand steadied her, warm and strong. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Your mother and I were having a disagreement." His expression darkened. "What did she say to you?" "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." He guided her toward the library, his hand on her elbow, and closed the door behind them. "Please, tell me." Cordelia laughed, slightly hysterical. "She told me I should be more strategic, that if I want to secure a proposal, I need to move faster, be more calculating, manipulate you into commitment before you remember why you locked yourself away." Sebastian's face went very still. "And what did you say?" "I said I wouldn't do it. That if you ever proposed to me, hypothetically speaking, it would have to be your choice, made freely, without deception." She met his eyes. "I told you before, Sebastian. I won't marry anyone under false pretenses. Not even a duke. Not even—" She stopped, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of how his eyes had changed, warming as she spoke. "Not even?" he prompted softly. "Not even you?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers brushing her cheek. "You really are remarkable," he said. "Do you know how many women have come through this house? How many of my mother's candidates I've endured? They all smiled too much, laughed too eagerly, agreed with everything I said. They looked at me and saw a title, a fortune, a prize to be won. And what do I see? A man." His voice was rough. "Just a man. Flawed, broken, struggling to be better than he was yesterday. You see Sebastian, not the Duke of Ashworth. And you speak to me like I'm a person, not a transaction to be completed. You are a person. I had forgotten that." His hand cupped her face, gentle and wondering. "You've reminded me this past week. You and Iris, showing me what it feels like to be part of a family instead of a monument to failure. Sebastian, I know it's too soon. I know I have no right to feel what I'm feeling. But Cordelia—" He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching hers. "I think I might be falling in love with you." Her heart stopped, restarted, hammered against her ribs like a wild thing trying to escape. "You don't know me well enough to love me. I know you well enough to know that I want to know you better, that I want to spend years learning all the things I don't yet know." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "Is that not a beginning? It's the most terrifying beginning I can imagine." "Me too." He smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise after endless darkness. "But I find I don't want to hide from it anymore. I have been so afraid for so long. And somehow, you've made the fear seem smaller, less insurmountable." She should pull back. She should be sensible, cautious, protect the heart she had guarded so carefully for so long. This was happening too fast, too intensely, built on too fragile foundations. But she had spent her whole life being sensible. "I think," she said slowly, "that I might be falling in love with you too." His kiss was soft, questioning, giving her every opportunity to retreat. She didn't retreat. She rose into it, meeting him with the same tentative courage, and felt the walls she had built crumble to nothing. When they finally pulled apart, both of them trembling, his forehead rested against hers. "Marry me," he whispered. "You said yourself it's too soon. Then say you'll stay. Say you'll give us time. Say—" He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "Say there's a chance." "There's a chance," she said. "There's more than a chance." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and she lost herself in the sweetness of it. The peace lasted 3 more days. They spent them wrapped in the fragile bubble of new love, stolen glances, brief touches, long conversations that meandered through every topic under the sun. Iris, sensing the change, bounced between them with effervescent joy, demanding to know if Cordelia would stay forever, if they were going to be a family, if she could call Cordelia Mama once they were married. "Slow down, sweetheart," Sebastian had said, laughing, actually laughing, the sound rusty but genuine. "We haven't even discussed marriage properly yet." "But you're going to. I can tell." Iris had beamed at them both. "And then Cordelia will stay forever, and we'll be happy, and everything will be perfect. Perfect, Cordelia thought, felt too fragile a word, too easily shattered. On the morning of the 4th day, the dowager summoned them both to the drawing-room. Her face was grim, her posture rigid with suppressed triumph. "I have visitors arriving this afternoon," she announced. "People who need to meet Miss Blackwood before any formal announcement can be made." Sebastian's expression darkened. "What visitors?" "The Earl of Westbrook and his wife." "And Sir Harold Pembroke." The dowager smiled thinly. "They have concerns about the appropriateness of this match. They wish to see for themselves whether Miss Blackwood is a suitable candidate for Duchess. They have no say in who I marry. They have a great deal of say in whether your marriage is accepted by society. The Earl is influential. His approval could silence the worst of the gossip. His disapproval could make your lives very difficult indeed." The dowager turned to Cordelia. "I trust you will conduct yourself appropriately, Miss Blackwood. Whatever happens, remember that you are being evaluated." "This is absurd," Sebastian said flatly. "I won't subject Cordelia to an inquisition. You will if you want any chance of happiness." The dowager's voice sharpened. "The gossip from Lady Hartwell's ball has not died down, Sebastian. If anything, it has grown worse. Your retreat to the country with Miss Blackwood in tow has been interpreted as confirmation of the more salacious rumours. The Earl's visit is a chance to establish a different narrative, a proper courtship, a respectable match. Refuse it, and you condemn your future wife to being forever seen as a fortune hunter who trapped a vulnerable widower." Sebastian looked at Cordelia, anguish in his eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't want this for you. It's all right." She squeezed his hand. "I've faced worse than aristocratic scrutiny. Let them come. Let them see that there's nothing improper about two people falling in love." But even as she said it, her stomach churned with dread. The visitors arrived at 4 o'clock. The Earl of Westbrook was a man of about 50, with silver hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to look through rather than at people. His wife was a faded beauty, clearly cowed, who said nothing beyond murmured pleasantries. Sir Harold Pembroke. Cordelia recognized him with a sinking heart, was the man she had drenched with punch at a ball 2 seasons ago, after he'd spent an entire dance staring down her bodice. He recognized her too. His smile was thin and sharp. "Miss Blackwood, what an unexpected pleasure." "Sir Harold." She curtsied minimally. "I had no idea you were acquainted with the Ashworth family. The Earl and I are old friends. When we heard about the Duke's situation, we felt it our duty to offer guidance." His eyes swept over her with obvious contempt. "I must say, I was surprised when I learned the identity of the young woman in question. I had assumed the Duke's standards were somewhat higher." "That's enough." Sebastian's voice was cold. "Miss Blackwood is a guest in my home, and will be treated with respect." "Of course, Your Grace. I meant no offence." But Sir Harold's expression said otherwise. The Earl stepped forward, his manner imperious. "Ashworth, I'll be direct. The rumours surrounding this situation are troubling. A clandestine meeting, a compromised reputation, a hasty retreat to the country, you can see how it looks. I can see how gossips have chosen to interpret it. Interpretation becomes reality in society, as you well know. Your wife's scandal damaged your reputation severely. Another scandal so soon after is none of your concern." Sebastian's hand found Cordelia's, gripping it firmly. "Miss Blackwood and I have done nothing improper. We have followed every rule of propriety during her visit, and our plans for the future are our own business." "Are they?" The Earl's eyes narrowed. "You are a duke, Ashworth. Your marriage affects more than just yourself. It affects your family name, your daughter's future, your standing in the House of Lords." His gaze flickered to Cordelia. "Miss Blackwood comes from a respectable family, I grant you. but her reputation precedes her. 3 failed seasons, a sharp tongue that has offended more than a few influential families. That incident with Sir Harold, an incident in which he behaved inappropriately and I defended myself, Cordelia said clearly. I will not apologize for refusing to tolerate disrespect. You see, Sir Harold appealed to the Earl. She has no sense of proper feminine deference. Is this the woman you want as Duchess of Ashworth, teaching your daughter to throw drinks at gentlemen who show her attention? Attention? Cordelia's temper finally snapped. You spent an entire dance staring at my breasts and making comments about what you'd like to do with them. That is not attention, Sir Harold. That is harassment, and I would throw that punch again without hesitation. Cordelia. The dowager's voice was sharp. No. Sebastian stepped forward, positioning himself between Cordelia and the visitors. Miss Blackwood is telling the truth. I can see it in Pembroke's face. You came here under the pretense of concern, but this is nothing but a petty vendetta dressed up as social propriety. Ashworth, get out. Sebastian's voice was deadly quiet. Get out of my house, and tell anyone who asks that Miss Blackwood has my complete faith and will soon have my name, regardless of what you or anyone else thinks about it. The Earl's face went purple. You're making a mistake. I have made many mistakes in my life. Loving Cordelia Blackwood will not be one of them. Sebastian rang for the butler. Hughes will show you out. I trust you can find your own way back to London. They left in a flurry of outrage and threats. The dowager followed them to the door, making soothing sounds that carried across the hall. Cordelia stood frozen, barely breathing, processing what had just happened. I'm sorry. Sebastian turned to her, his face stricken. I've made everything worse. The Earl will spread this story everywhere. You defended me. Of course I defended you. No one has ever... Her voice broke. In my entire life, no one has ever stood up for me like that. My family, my supposed friends, they always told me to be quieter, smaller, more accommodating. They blamed me for the situations I found myself in. But you were right to defend yourself against Pembroke. You were right to refuse to be diminished. He took her hands in his. I don't want a wife who bends to every pressure, who accepts mistreatment for the sake of propriety. I want you, Cordelia, exactly as you are, sharp tongue and all. She kissed him, fiercely, desperately, pouring all her gratitude and love and terror into it. When they broke apart, the dowager was standing in the doorway. Her face was a mask of cold fury. You've ruined everything, she said flatly. The Earl will destroy you both. He has connections, influence. He can make your lives impossible. And for what? For pride? For some misguided sense of romance? For love, Sebastian said quietly. Something you've never understood. Love. The dowager laughed bitterly. Love destroyed your first marriage. Love made you a laughingstock. And now love will destroy your second chance at happiness, all because you couldn't control your temper for one afternoon. That's enough, Mother. Is it? Because I have one more piece of information that might interest you both. Her smile was cruel. The Earl's visit wasn't just about propriety, Sebastian. It was about Iris. Cordelia felt Sebastian go rigid beside her. What about Iris? Lady Pemberton, your late wife's mother, has been building a case for custody. She claims you're an unfit father, that Iris is being neglected, that this house is no place for a child to be raised. The Earl was here to assess whether adding Miss Blackwood to the household would help or hurt your case. The dowager's eyes glittered. After today's performance, I think we can all guess which way his report will go. Sebastian's face had gone white. You knew about this. You knew, and you didn't tell me. I was trying to help you. If you had played your cards right, if Miss Blackwood had been demure and accommodating, The Earl might have been convinced that stability was being restored to this household. Instead, you used my daughter as a bargaining chip in your social games. Sebastian's voice was shaking with fury. You manipulated everyone around you, Cordelia, the Earl, even Iris, and now you stand there acting as if we're the ones who failed. I did what I thought was best. You did what you always do. You schemed and plotted and tried to control everyone within reach, and now my daughter might pay the price for your machinations. The Dowager's composure cracked. If you had just listened to me. Get out. Sebastian, get out of this house, tonight. I don't care where you go, but you are no longer welcome here. The Dowager stared at him for a long moment. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. Cordelia watched her go, feeling the weight of everything that had just happened settling on her shoulders. The Earl's hostility, the custody threat, the Dowager's betrayal. Whatever fragile happiness they had built was crumbling around them, and she didn't know how to stop it. "Sebastian," she said quietly, "what do we do?" He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I don't know, but we face it together. Whatever comes, we face it together." She held him tight and prayed it would be enough. That night, after Iris had been put to bed and the household had settled into uneasy quiet, Cordelia found Sebastian in the library. He was standing at the window, staring out at the darkness, a glass of untouched brandy in his hand. "The hearing is in 3 weeks," he said without turning around. "My solicitor sent word this afternoon. Lady Pemberton has convinced a magistrate to hear her case. If she wins, she'll have the right to take Iris to raise her as she sees fit. She won't win. You don't know that." He finally turned to face her, and she saw the devastation in his eyes. "The magistrate will hear testimony about my coldness, my neglect, my failure to provide a proper home. He'll hear that I drove my wife to adultery, that I couldn't give her what she needed, that the scandal of her death made me unfit for polite society. And now they'll add today's events, the confrontation with the Earl, my loss of temper, the spectacle of me throwing respectable visitors out of my home. They'll also hear about a father who loves his daughter desperately, a man who has devoted himself to her welfare, who redesigned his entire house to make her comfortable, who checks on her every night after she falls asleep." Cordelia crossed to stand beside him. "The magistrate will hear the truth, Sebastian, and the truth is that you are a good father." "I'm not." His voice cracked. "I've been so lost in my own grief, my own wounds, that I've barely been present for her. She's grown up in this house surrounded by servants because I couldn't bear to be around anyone. She has nightmares because I wasn't there to comfort her. She builds walls because I taught her that's how you survive. And yet she loves you, fiercely, unconditionally, with everything she has." Cordelia took his hand. "Do you know what she told me, that first day in the tower room? She said she doesn't want another mother. She just wants you to be happy again. That's what matters to her, Sebastian. Not a perfect father, just you. Present, trying, there." He looked at her for a long moment. "What did I do to deserve you?" "You saw me. When everyone else saw a sharp-tongued spinster past her prime, you saw someone worth defending, worth fighting for." She smiled through the tears threatening to spill. "And I saw you. Not the Duke, not the scandal, not the cold exterior. Just Sebastian, wounded and struggling and trying so hard to be better. I love you." The words came out rough, almost desperate. "I know the timing is terrible and everything is falling apart, but I need you to know whatever happens with the hearing, whatever happens with society, I love you. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving myself worthy of you." "You don't have to prove anything." "I do. I will." He pulled her close. "We'll fight this. Together. I won't lose Iris, and I won't lose you. Whatever it takes." She held him tight, feeling his heartbeat against her cheek, and allowed herself to hope. The battle was coming. But for the first time in either of their lives, neither of them would be fighting alone. The days leading up to the custody hearing passed in a blur of preparation and dread. Sebastian's solicitor, a sharp-eyed man named Mr. Hartley, arrived at Ashworth Park with boxes of documents and a grim assessment of their chances. Lady Pemberton had been thorough in building her case. She had gathered statements from former servants, social acquaintances, even distant relations willing to testify about Sebastian's coldness, his withdrawal from society, his failure to provide Iris with appropriate maternal guidance. "The magistrate is Sir William Blackstone," Mr. Hartley informed them during one of their strategy sessions. "He's known for traditional views on family and propriety. He'll want to see stability, respectability, evidence that the child is being raised in a proper household. And a household headed by a grieving widower with a scandalous past doesn't qualify as proper." Sebastian's voice was bitter. "Not as it currently stands, no." Mr. Hartley shuffled his papers. "However, your upcoming marriage changes the calculation somewhat. Miss Blackwood's presence demonstrates a commitment to providing Lady Iris with feminine guidance. If Miss Blackwood were willing to testify—" "No." Sebastian's response was immediate. "I won't put her through that. The Earl's report will have reached London by now. She'll be torn apart on the stand." "Sebastian," Cordelia touched his arm, "let me make my own decisions about what I'm willing to endure. You don't understand what they'll do. They'll bring up every piece of gossip, every sharp word you've ever spoken, every man you've refused. They'll paint you as exactly the wrong sort of influence for Iris, a bitter spinster who couldn't secure a husband through normal means and had to resort to entrapment. And I will stand there and tell the truth about what happened at Lady Hartwell's ball, about why I stayed with Iris when I found her alone, about the woman I've seen you become over these past weeks." Cordelia met his eyes steadily. "I am not afraid of their questions, Sebastian. I am afraid of what happens if we don't fight with everything we have." Mr. Hartley cleared his throat. "There is another consideration. The testimony of Lady Iris herself." Sebastian went pale. "Absolutely not. Sir William may request to speak with her regardless of our wishes. It's within his authority to assess the child's welfare directly." The solicitor's voice was gentle but firm. "It would be better if we prepared her, rather than having her blindsided in the courtroom. She's 6 years old. I won't have her subjected to— She's nearly 7, and she's stronger than you give her credit for." Cordelia spoke quietly. "I've spent hours with her these past weeks. She understands more than you realize, and she loves you so fiercely, Sebastian. If given the chance to speak, she will defend you with everything she has." "That's what I'm afraid of." Sebastian pushed back from the table, pacing to the window. "She shouldn't have to defend me. She shouldn't have to stand in a courtroom and convince a stranger that her father deserves to keep her. This is supposed to be my job, protecting her. Instead, I've created a situation where she might lose her home, her family, everything she knows. You didn't create this situation. Lady Pemberton did." Cordelia rose and went to him, placing her hand on his back. "She's using Iris as a weapon against you, the same way your mother tried to use both of you as pawns in her social games. But Iris isn't a pawn, and neither are you. You're people complicated, imperfect, loving people who deserve the chance to be a family." Sebastian turned to face her. In the grey afternoon light, his face was haggard with worry, but his eyes, when they met hers, held something that looked almost like hope. "How do you do that?" he asked quietly. "Do what?" "Make me believe things might actually work out, even when every rational part of my mind says otherwise." She smiled, reaching up to touch his face. Perhaps because I've spent so long being rational and cautious and self-protective, and all it got me was loneliness and regret. Sometimes the irrational choice is the right one. Sometimes you have to believe in things you can't prove. He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. I love you. I know. I love you too. She glanced back at Mr. Hartley, who was studying his papers with exaggerated attention. Now, let's figure out how to win this hearing. The night before the hearing, Cordelia couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, running through every possible scenario in her mind, the questions they might ask, the accusations they might make. The way Sebastian's face would look if they lost that terrible blankness returning, the walls slamming back into place, shutting out everyone, including her. She couldn't let that happen. Wouldn't let it happen. A soft knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. She rose, pulling on her wrapper, and opened it to find Iris standing in the hallway in her nightgown. The child's face was pale, her eyes too bright. I couldn't sleep, Iris whispered. I keep thinking about tomorrow. Cordelia knelt down and opened her arms. Iris flew into them, trembling. I know, sweetheart. I couldn't sleep either. What if they take me away? The words were muffled against Cordelia's shoulder. What if the magistrate decides Papa isn't good enough and I have to go live with Grandmother Pemberton? She doesn't even like me. She just wants to hurt Papa. That's not going to happen. Cordelia pulled back to look into Iris's face. Your father and I are going to fight for you tomorrow. We're going to tell the truth about what our family is really like, and the magistrate is going to see that you belong here with us. But what if the truth isn't enough? Iris's voice cracked. People lie all the time. Grandmother Pemberton will lie about Papa, and the Earl will lie about you, and they're important people. What if the magistrate believes them instead of us? Cordelia considered the question seriously. This child deserved honesty, not empty reassurance. Then we'll appeal. We'll find other magistrates, other courts. We'll keep fighting until we win. She smoothed Iris's hair back from her face. I made you a promise, remember? That first night at the ball. I said I wouldn't leave you alone. I meant it then, and I mean it now. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever happens ever, you will not face it alone. Iris studied her face with that uncanny perception children sometimes possessed. You really love Papa, don't you? It's not just because of the scandal, or because Grandmother Ashworth wanted you to. I really love him, more than I ever expected to love anyone. Cordelia smiled. And I love you too, Iris. You're the bravest, kindest, most remarkable child I've ever known. I would be honored to be your stepmother, if you'll have me. Iris's face transformed, the fear giving way to something luminous and hopeful. I would have you. I would have you forever and ever. Then that's settled. Cordelia rose, keeping hold of Iris's hand. Now, since neither of us can sleep, what do you say we raid the kitchen for warm milk and biscuits? I happen to know where Mrs. Henderson hides the good ones. Iris giggled, the sound washing away some of the tension in the air. The ones with the chocolate? The very same. They crept through the dark hallways hand in hand, two conspirators on a mission of vital importance. In the kitchen, they found the biscuits and heated milk on the stove, speaking in whispers that gradually became giggles as Iris told stories about the household staff and their various eccentricities. They were just settling at the worn kitchen table when a sound made them both freeze. Sebastian appeared in the doorway, his hair dishevelled, his shirt untucked, his feet bare. He took in the scene his daughter and his intended, surrounded by contraband biscuits, and something in his face softened. I should have known I'd find you two together. We couldn't sleep, Iris explained unnecessarily. Cordelia said we could have the chocolate biscuits. Did she indeed? Sebastian's eyes met Cordelia's, warm with affection, and something deeper. I suppose I should be grateful you left any for me. He joined them at the table, accepting the cup of milk Cordelia poured him, and for a while they simply sat together in the quiet kitchen. Three people who had been alone for so long, who had built walls against the world and found those walls crumbling in each other's presence. "I want to speak tomorrow," Iris said suddenly. Sebastian's cup paused halfway to his lips. "What?" "At the hearing. Mr. Hartley said the magistrate might want to talk to me anyway. I want to do it." Her chin lifted with familiar determination. "I want to tell him about our family, about how you check on me every night, and how you're teaching me to ride, and how you always know when I'm sad, even when I try to hide it. I want to tell him about Cordelia, and how she makes everything better." She reached out and took both their hands. "I'm not scared. Well, I am scared, but I want to do it anyway." Sebastian looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and Cordelia watched something shift in his expression. The fear was still there, but it was joined by something else now. Pride, perhaps, and a dawning recognition. "When did you grow up?" he asked softly. "I've been growing up the whole time, Papa. You just couldn't see it because you were too busy being sad." Iris's voice was matter-of-fact, without accusation. "But you're not as sad anymore, and I'm not as scared. So maybe now we can both see each other properly." Sebastian's eyes glistened. He pulled Iris into his arms, holding her tight, and Cordelia felt tears slip down her own cheeks as she watched them. "I see you," Sebastian whispered into his daughter's hair. "I see you, sweetheart. I'm sorry it took so long." "It's all right, Papa." Iris pulled back to smile at him. "We have lots of time now." The hearing was held in the village assembly hall, a modest building that felt far too ordinary for the weight of what would be decided within its walls. Sir William Blackstone sat at a raised table at the front, flanked by his clerk and a court recorder. The gallery was filled with observers, local gentry curious about the scandal, representatives from both families, journalists who had travelled from London to cover the proceedings. Lady Pemberton sat on one side of the room, dressed in severe black, her face a mask of righteous concern. Her solicitor was a thin, predatory man who shuffled his papers with obvious anticipation. Sebastian, Cordelia, and Iris sat on the other side. Mr. Hartley had positioned them carefully, Sebastian looking strong and attentive, Cordelia composed and respectable in a modest grey dress, Iris between them holding both their hands. "This hearing will come to order." Sir William's voice was dry and precise. "We are here to consider the petition of Lady Pemberton for custody of Lady Iris Crane, minor child of Sebastian Crane, Duke of Ashworth. Lady Pemberton, you may present your case." What followed was everything Sebastian had feared and worse. Witness after witness took the stand to paint a picture of neglect and dysfunction. Former servants spoke of the Duke's long absences, his cold demeanour, the way he seemed to look through people rather than at them. Social acquaintances testified to his withdrawal from society, his failure to provide Iris with appropriate companions, his refusal to engage with the normal activities of his class. Then came the testimony about Cordelia. Sir Harold Pembroke took the stand with obvious relish. He described the punch incident in terms that made Cordelia sound unhinged, violent, utterly unsuited to any position of authority over a child. He spoke of her sharp tongue, her refusal to accept guidance, her unwomanly insistence on speaking her mind. "In my opinion," Sir Harold concluded, "Miss Blackwood represents exactly the wrong sort of influence for young Lady Iris. She will teach the child to be ungovernable, disrespectful, and entirely unsuited for her eventual role in society." The Earl of Westbrook followed with an account of his visit to Ashworth Park that bore little resemblance to what had actually occurred. In his telling, Sebastian had been irrationally hostile, Cordelia had been crude and confrontational, and the entire household had been in disarray. "It is clear to me," the Earl concluded, that the Duke is incapable of managing either his household or his temper. Such a man should not be entrusted with the welfare of an impressionable child. Through it all, Sebastian sat rigid, his jaw clenched so tight Cordelia feared he might shatter. She kept her hand in his, squeezing gently whenever the testimony became particularly vicious. Iris sat very still, her small face pale but determined. Finally, the opposition rested their case. Sir William turned to Sebastian's side of the room. "Mr. Hartley, you may present evidence for the defence." Mr. Hartley called the housekeeper first, Mrs. Henderson, who had worked at Ashworth Park for 20 years. She spoke simply and clearly about the household she managed, the care taken with Lady Iris, the transformation she had witnessed over the past weeks. "The Duke has always loved his daughter," Mrs. Henderson said firmly. "He shows it differently than some might expect, but anyone with eyes can see it. And since Miss Blackwood arrived, I've seen something I feared I'd never see again. Hope. The house feels alive again." The Duke smiles. Lady Iris laughs. "That's not neglect, sir. That's healing." The stable-master testified next, describing how Sebastian had spent hours teaching Iris to ride, patient and gentle even when she was frightened. The cook spoke of special meals prepared for Iris's birthday, secret treats smuggled to the nursery. The nursemaid described how Sebastian checked on his daughter every night, standing in her doorway watching her sleep, sometimes sitting beside her bed until her nightmares passed. Then Mr. Hartley called Cordelia to the stand. She rose on steady legs, her heart hammering but her face calm. She had prepared for this. She knew what she needed to say. "Miss Blackwood," Mr. Hartley's voice was gentle, "can you describe how you came to know the Duke and Lady Iris?" Cordelia told the story from the beginning. The ball, the crying child in the dark, the choice to stay when she could have walked away. She spoke of finding Iris huddled behind the globe, counting backward from 100 to calm herself. She described the Duke's arrival, his initial suspicion, his gradual thawing as he realized she meant his daughter no harm. "And since arriving at Ashworth Park," Mr. Hartley prompted, "I have witnessed a father who adores his child and a child who adores him in return." Cordelia's voice was clear, carrying to every corner of the room. "I have seen the Duke spend hours reading with Iris, playing with her, listening to her stories about pressed flowers and imaginary kingdoms. I have seen him rearrange his entire schedule to accommodate her riding lessons. I have seen him hold her when she wakes from nightmares, singing the lullabies he remembers from his own childhood." "You sound very certain of the Duke's devotion." "I am certain. Because I have also seen him doubt himself, seen him fear that he is failing her, that his grief and his wounds have made him inadequate, and that fear, that constant questioning of whether he is enough, is not the hallmark of a neglectful father. It is the hallmark of a man who loves his daughter so much that he cannot bear the thought of disappointing her." Lady Pemberton's solicitor rose for cross-examination, his smile sharp. "Miss Blackwood, is it not true that you were found alone with the Duke in a private room at Lady Hartwell's ball, in a compromising position?" "I was found in a private room with the Duke's daughter, who had been abandoned by her grandmother and was crying alone in the dark. The Duke arrived shortly afterward to search for his child. And is it not true that the resulting scandal forced the Duke to offer you marriage? That without that scandal you would have no prospect of becoming a duchess?" Cordelia felt her temper flare but kept her voice steady. "It is true that the scandal created expectations of marriage. It is not true that I sought or manufactured that scandal. I stayed with a frightened child because it was the decent thing to do. If society chooses to interpret decency as scheming, that reflects on society, not on me. You have a reputation for sharp words and unfeminine behaviour. Do you deny that you assaulted Sir Harold Pembroke at a public ball?" I poured punch on him after he spent an entire dance making crude remarks about my body and ignoring my requests that he stop. If protecting myself from harassment constitutes assault, then yes, I am guilty. Cordelia lifted her chin. But I would suggest that a man who cannot control his own behavior toward women is perhaps not the best judge of what constitutes appropriate conduct. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The solicitor's smile flickered. You seem to have an answer for everything, Miss Blackwood. I have the truth. The answers come naturally from that. The solicitor returned to his seat, clearly dissatisfied but unable to find further purchase. Sir William made a note, his expression unreadable. Then Mr. Hartley called his final witness. Lady Iris Crane. The room went silent as Iris rose from her seat. She looked impossibly small, walking to the witness chair, her dark hair neatly braided, her best dress carefully pressed. Sebastian half rose, as if to stop her, but Cordelia's hand on his arm held him in place. She wants to do this, Cordelia whispered. She needs to do this. Sir William leaned forward, his severe face softening slightly as he addressed the child. Lady Iris, do you understand why you're here today? Yes, sir. Iris's voice was quiet but clear. Grandmother Pemberton wants to take me away from Papa. She thinks he's not a good father. And what do you think? Iris was silent for a long moment, her small hands folded in her lap. When she spoke, her words were careful and precise, clearly rehearsed but no less genuine for that. I think my Papa is the best father in the world. I know he's not perfect. He gets sad sometimes, and he doesn't always know how to talk about feelings, and sometimes he forgets to come to meals because he's working. But he always comes to say good night, every single night, even when he thinks I'm already asleep. He stands in my doorway and watches me, and sometimes he whispers that he loves me. I pretend I don't hear, but I always do. Tears were streaming down Sebastian's face. He made no move to wipe them away. He's teaching me to ride, Iris continued, and he reads to me, even though he says he's bad at doing voices. He made my room brighter because I told him I didn't like the dark. And when I have nightmares, he comes and sits with me until I fall asleep again. She looked directly at Sir William, her grey eyes, her father's eyes, steady and fierce. Grandmother Pemberton says he's cold and neglectful, but she doesn't know him. She only knows the person he pretends to be when he's hurting. The real Papa is kind and good, and he loves me more than anything. And Miss Blackwood? Sir William asked. What do you think of her? Iris's face transformed into a smile of pure, uncomplicated joy. I love her. She found me when I was lost and scared, and she stayed with me even when it caused her trouble. She teaches me things: how to press flowers, how to count backward when I'm overwhelmed, how to be brave even when I'm frightened. She makes Papa smile. She makes our house feel like a home instead of a mausoleum, Sir William suggested, his lips twitching. Yes, that's the word Papa used once. She made it stop being a mausoleum. Iris turned to look at Sebastian and Cordelia, her small face radiant with love. We're a family now, a real family. Please don't break us apart. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Sir William cleared his throat. Thank you, Lady Iris. You may return to your seat. Iris climbed down and walked back to Sebastian, who gathered her into his arms as if he might never let go. Over her head, his eyes met Cordelia's, and she saw tears there, tears and gratitude and love so profound it took her breath away. Sir William shuffled his papers for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he looked up. I have heard testimony from both sides of this matter. I have heard claims of neglect and counterclaims of devotion. I have heard character assessments that paint very different pictures of the individuals involved. His gaze swept the room. But what has struck me most in these proceedings is the testimony of the child herself. Lady Iris speaks with clarity and conviction about her father's love. She demonstrates no fear of him, no resentment, no confusion about her place in his affections. Whatever failures of parenting may have occurred in the past, the evidence before me suggests a household in the process of healing. Lady Pemberton's face had gone white with fury. "Furthermore," Sir William continued, "I am troubled by certain aspects of the petitioner's case. The testimony of Sir Harold Pembroke regarding Miss Blackwood's character was clearly coloured by personal animus. The Earl of Westbrook's account of his visit to Ashworth Park contradicts the testimony of multiple household staff who were present for the same events. And the characterization of the Duke as cold and neglectful is difficult to reconcile with the daughter who just testified, with obvious sincerity, about his nightly visits to her bedside." He set down his papers and looked directly at Sebastian. "Your Grace, you are not a perfect father. No one is. You have struggled with grief and isolation in ways that have affected your household and your child. But struggle is not the same as failure, and isolation is not the same as neglect." He paused. "I find no grounds for removing Lady Iris from your custody. The petition is denied." The room erupted. Lady Pemberton was on her feet, shouting objections that her solicitor frantically tried to moderate. The gallery buzzed with excited conversation. Mr. Hartley was shaking Sebastian's hand, his professional composure cracking into a genuine smile. But Sebastian's attention was fixed on Iris, who was crying and laughing at the same time, her arms wrapped around his neck. "We won, Papa. We won. I get to stay." "You get to stay, sweetheart, forever and ever." Cordelia stood slightly apart, watching them, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This was what mattered. This moment, this family, this love that had grown against all odds in the space of a few short weeks. Then Sebastian looked up, reached out, and pulled her into the embrace. "We won," he said against her hair. "We're safe." "We're safe," she repeated, and let herself believe it. The wedding took place 3 weeks later, in the small chapel at Ashworth Park. It was not the grand society affair the Dowager had envisioned. There were no aristocratic guests, no elaborate decorations, no crowds of curious onlookers. There was only family, the family they had chosen, and the family they were becoming. Iris served as flower girl, scattering rose petals down the aisle with solemn concentration. The household staff filled the small pews, Mrs. Henderson dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, the stable master sitting ramrod straight in his Sunday best. Cordelia's father had died 2 weeks before, slipping away peacefully in his sleep. She had been at his bedside, holding his hand, when he took his final breath. In his last lucid moments, he had asked about the Duke, about whether Cordelia was happy, whether she had found what she was looking for. "I found everything, Papa," she had told him. "I found love and family, and a place where I belong." He had smiled, squeezed her hand, and closed his eyes. She wore grey to her wedding, not in mourning, but in tribute. A soft dove grey silk that Sebastian had chosen for her, saying the colour reminded him of dawn breaking after a long night. She carried a bouquet of pressed flowers that Iris had assembled, each one selected for its meaning in the Victorian language of flowers. Red roses for love, white jasmine for grace, purple hyacinth for asking forgiveness. Sebastian stood at the altar in his finest coat, his face transformed by an expression Cordelia had never seen there before, open, unguarded, radiating a joy that seemed almost painful in its intensity. The vicar spoke the traditional words, but Cordelia barely heard them. She was too busy looking at Sebastian, memorizing every detail of this moment, storing it away against whatever darkness might come in the future. "I, Sebastian Arthur Crane, take thee, Cordelia Anne Blackwood." His voice was steady, his eyes never leaving hers. I, Cordelia Ann Blackwood, take thee, Sebastian Arthur Crane. Her voice broke slightly on his name, and she saw tears glinting in his eyes. With this ring, I thee wed. The gold band slid onto her finger, warm from his hand. I now pronounce you man and wife. Sebastian kissed her gently at first, then deeper, a promise and a declaration and a homecoming all at once. The chapel erupted in cheers and applause, but Cordelia barely noticed. She was too lost in the sensation of finally belonging somewhere. When they pulled apart, Iris was there, bouncing with impatience. Can I call you Mama now? Please? You said I could when you got married, and you're married now, so can I? Cordelia knelt down, heedless of her wedding dress, and pulled Iris into her arms. You can call me whatever you like, sweetheart. But yes, Mama would make me very happy. Mama, Iris said, testing the word. Her face split into a grin. Mama and Papa and me. We're a real family now. The realist, Sebastian agreed, his voice rough with emotion. He gathered them both close, his arms around his wife and daughter, and for a long moment they simply stood there, three people who had been so alone for so long, finally complete. 8 years later, the ballroom was magnificent. Cordelia stood at the edge of the dance floor, watching the glittering crowd swirl through the candlelight, and reflected on how much had changed since the last time she had attended Lady Hartwell's annual ball. 8 years ago, she had stood in this same room, different house, same event, hiding behind potted plants and dreading her future. Now she was the Duchess of Ashworth, mother of 4, and one of the most influential hostesses in London society. The thought still amazed her sometimes. You're looking pensive. Sebastian's voice came from behind her, warm and familiar. She turned to find him holding 2 glasses of champagne, his grey eyes soft with affection. Just remembering, she said, accepting a glass. The last time we were both at one of Lady Hartwell's events. Ah, his lips curved. The night you stole my heart by refusing to be intimidated by my terrible reputation. I believe your daughter stole my heart first. You were merely part of the package. I'll take it. He moved to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Speaking of our daughter, have you seen who she's dancing with? Cordelia followed his gaze to the dance floor, where Iris, 14 now, lovely and poised, and so much like the confident young woman Cordelia had always known she could become, was waltzing with a young man. He was perhaps 17, with earnest eyes and a slightly nervous expression, and he was looking at Iris as if she had hung the moon. Lord Ashby's son, Cordelia said. Henry, I think. He's looked at her like that all evening. Are you going to challenge him to a duel? Don't tempt me. But Sebastian was smiling, his eyes crinkling at the corners. She's grown up so quickly. I remember when she used to hide behind globes at parties. She's not hiding anymore. You made sure of that. Cordelia leaned into his side. We both did. They watched their daughter dance, graceful and happy, so different from the frightened child who had clutched Cordelia's hand in a dark room 8 years ago. Mama! Papa! The shriek came from somewhere near the refreshment table. Cordelia turned to see their youngest, 5-year-old Emma, racing toward them with her skirts hiked up around her knees. Behind her, looking mortified, was their eldest son, 10-year-old William. She got away from me, William said apologetically. I tried to make her sit still, but she's impossible. I am not impossible, Emma declared, skidding to a stop in front of her parents. I am spirited. That's what Iris says. Spirited is one word for it. Sebastian scooped her up, setting her on his hip despite her protests that she was too old to be carried. What's happened now? Margaret said her first word. Emma's face was alight with excitement. She said Mama. Well, Mrs. Henderson says it was probably just a noise, but I know it was Mama because she was looking right at the portrait of Mama in the nursery when she said it. Cordelia felt her heart squeeze. Margaret, their youngest at barely a year old, was back at the London townhouse with her nurse. The portrait Emma mentioned had been painted 2 years ago, showing Cordelia with all 4 children, a commissioned piece that Sebastian had insisted on after Cordelia mentioned she had no family portraits of herself as a child. Her first word, Sebastian said softly, and we missed it. We'll hear plenty more. Cordelia reached out to smooth Emma's hair. She'll be talking non-stop before we know it, just like this one. I don't talk non-stop, Emma protested. I just have a lot of important things to say. William rolled his eyes with the exaggerated patience of an older brother. May I go back to the card room, Father? Lord Ashby's son, the younger one, challenged me to a game. Not for money. Of course not. For honour. Sebastian nodded his permission, and William disappeared into the crowd. 7-year-old Thomas, their 3rd child, had refused to attend the ball entirely, preferring to stay home with his books. He took after his father in that way, happiest in libraries, wary of crowds. Down, Emma demanded, wriggling in Sebastian's arms. I see Cousin Penelope. She promised to teach me a card trick. Sebastian set her down, and she vanished in a flutter of ribbons. Cousin Penelope, Cordelia murmured, watching Emma race toward the corner where Penelope Whitmore, now happily married to a widowed vicar who didn't mind her twisted foot or her quiet ways, sat chatting with other matrons. I still can't believe how well they get along. Penelope understands her. They're both observers by nature. Sebastian pulled her closer, his hand settling at her waist. Dance with me? Here? Now? Why not? We are at a ball. We are supposed to be chaperoning our eldest daughter. Our eldest daughter is perfectly capable of chaperoning herself, and besides... He nodded toward the dance floor, where Iris had noticed them watching and was making frantic shooing gestures. I believe we've been dismissed. Cordelia laughed. Fine, 1 dance. He led her onto the floor as a waltz began, pulling her close in a way that would have been scandalous 8 years ago. Now, as an established married couple with 4 children and a reputation for devoted partnership, no one batted an eye. Do you remember what you said to me? Sebastian asked as they moved through the steps. That first night, in the carriage? I said many things that night. You'll have to be more specific. You said your prospects were your own concern, that you wouldn't marry anyone out of obligation, not even a duke. His hand tightened at her waist. You meant it. You would have walked away, rather than be trapped. I would have. I had already resigned myself to a life of servitude under my brother's roof. Cordelia smiled up at him. But then a small girl grabbed my hand and wouldn't let go, and everything changed. She's always had excellent taste. She learned it from her father. They danced in silence for a moment, lost in the music and each other. I have something for you, Sebastian said finally. A gift. But I wanted to wait until tonight to give it to you. Tonight? Why tonight? Because 8 years ago tonight, I looked at a crowd watching me, felt your hand in mine, and realized my life would never be the same. He guided her toward the edge of the dance floor. Come with me. He led her out of the ballroom, down a quiet corridor, to a small parlour that had been set aside for the family's use. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth, and on the mantel sat a small velvet box. Sebastian picked it up and turned to face her. I never gave you a proper engagement ring, he said. We were too caught up in scandals and custody hearings and falling in love. By the time things settled down, it seemed unnecessary. We were already married, already a family. I never needed a ring. I know, but I wanted to give you one anyway. He opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of silk, was a ring unlike any Cordelia had ever seen. The band was intricately worked gold, delicate and beautiful. The stone was not a diamond, but a deep, rich amethyst, surrounded by tiny pearls. "It was my grandmother's," Sebastian said softly. "Not my mother's mother, my father's. She died before I was born, but my father always spoke of her as the great love of his life. He said she had a sharp tongue and a tender heart, and that she never let anyone make her feel small." Cordelia's eyes filled with tears. "Sebastian, when I think of the woman I want to spend my life with, the woman I want by my side for all the years to come, I think of someone like her. Someone who speaks her mind and loves fiercely and refuses to apologize for being exactly who she is." He took the ring from the box. "Someone like you." He slid the ring onto her finger, next to the simple gold band she had worn for 8 years. "I love you," he said. "I loved you that first night, even though I didn't know it yet. I loved you through the scandal and the hearing and all the dark days that followed. I love you more every day, and I will keep loving you until I take my last breath." He raised her hand to his lips. "Thank you for not walking away. Thank you for staying. Thank you for teaching me what it means to be happy." Cordelia was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks, but she was smiling too. "You taught me the same thing," she managed. "I had given up on happiness. I had convinced myself that love was something that happened to other people, softer people, easier people, people who knew how to bend. But you showed me that I didn't have to bend, that I could be loved exactly as I am, sharp edges and all. I love your sharp edges. I know you do. That's what makes you remarkable." She kissed him deeply, thoroughly, the way she had kissed him on their wedding day, the way she had kissed him 1,000 times since. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "We should get back to the ball," he murmured. "Our daughter will think we've abandoned her. Our daughter has probably forgotten we exist. She's far too busy being admired by Lord Ashby's son. Don't remind me." They walked back to the ballroom hand in hand, Cordelia's new ring glinting in the candlelight. As they entered, Iris caught sight of them and waved, her face glowing with happiness. William was back, describing some card game victory to his father with elaborate gestures. Emma had talked Penelope into joining her on the dance floor for a very unconventional country dance. Somewhere at home, Margaret was sleeping, Thomas was reading, and the life they had built together continued in all its chaotic, beautiful complexity. "You know," Cordelia said, watching their family scatter across the ballroom like seeds taking root, "I used to dream about escaping events like this, hiding in libraries, slipping outside doors, being anywhere but here. And now?" She smiled up at him, this man who had transformed from a cold, wounded stranger into the great love of her life. "Now I can't imagine being anywhere else." Sebastian squeezed her hand, his grey eyes warm with love and laughter and the quiet contentment of a man who had finally learned what happiness meant. "Neither can I, my love. Neither can I." Across the ballroom, a waltz began to play the same waltz that had been playing 8 years ago, when a crying child had grabbed a stranger's hand and changed 3 lives forever. Cordelia leaned into Sebastian's embrace, watching their daughter dance, listening to their son's laughter, feeling the weight of the ring on her finger. It was, she thought, exactly the life she had never dared to dream of. And it was hers.